You've been taught that choosing yourself is selfish, that letting go means losing people, that peace comes only after everything finally works out. But if that were true, why do so many people who give everything to others still feel exhausted? Why do you feel torn inside, saying yes when your body says no, holding on when your heart is already tired, smiling while something in you quietly fades away? The truth is this: alignment doesn't come from fixing the world. It comes from releasing what was never yours to carry. And Buddhist wisdom has been pointing to this for thousands of years, not through force, not through becoming someone better, but through letting go of the roles, the stories, the need to be understood, the need to be chosen. When you choose yourself, not the ego, not the image, but the quiet truth inside you, life stops fighting you. Things begin to settle, decisions become simpler, your mind softens, your breath deepens. As you listen, you may feel resistance or relief, or both. That's normal. Something old may loosen, something heavy may fall away. Not all at once, but enough for you to feel it. This is not about escaping life. This is about finally standing where you are, without apology and without explanation. This is not just something to listen to. This is a return to clarity, to stillness, to alignment. If you're ready to stop forcing, ready to stop abandoning yourself, ready to let life meet you halfway, then stay here, and let's begin. Something subtle is happening already, not outside of you, but inside. A quiet shift, a small pause where you're no longer rushing to understand, no longer trying to grab meaning. This is the space where real change begins. Not with effort, not with willpower, but with honesty. The kind that doesn't need an audience. From here, we move forward gently, because what comes next is not about adding something new to your life, but about releasing a misunderstanding you may have carried for a very long time. Most people think choosing yourself means building a stronger identity, a clearer image, firmer boundaries, a louder voice that finally says, "This is who I am." But in Buddhist wisdom, choosing yourself points in the opposite direction. It is not about constructing a solid self. It is about seeing that the self you have been protecting, defending, and explaining was never as solid as it appeared. And that realization is not frightening, it is freeing. From a very young age, you were taught to answer a question that never truly made sense. Who are you? You learned to respond with labels, a name, a role, a personality. Later, achievements were added. Opinions, beliefs, wounds, preferences. Slowly, a picture formed. And without noticing, you began to live as if you had to protect that picture. Improve it, defend it, make sure others saw it the right way. This effort became exhausting, yet invisible, because everyone around you was doing the same thing. Buddhist teaching calls this mistaken picture the idea of a permanent self, not as an insult, not as a judgment, but as a simple observation. When you look closely, what you call me is always changing. Your thoughts change, your moods change, your body changes. Even your values shift over time. Yet, somewhere inside, there is a pressure to remain consistent, to be someone, to hold a fixed position in the world. That pressure is one of the quiet sources of suffering. Choosing yourself through the lens of non-self does not mean choosing the personality you like most. It means choosing truth over habit. It means noticing that much of your pain comes from trying to hold together something that was never meant to be fixed. When you stop trying to freeze yourself into a shape, life begins to move with you again. This is where many people misunderstand Buddhist non-self. They hear it as erasure, as if you are supposed to disappear, become passive, or lose your uniqueness. But that is not what is being pointed to. Non-self does not say you do not exist. It says you do not exist in the way you think you do. You are not a solid object moving through life. You are a process, a flow of experience. And when you stop clinging to the idea of a solid me, you stop fighting reality. Think about how often you feel hurt, not by what happens, but by what it means about you. A comment feels like disrespect. A delay feels like rejection. A disagreement feels like an attack. These reactions arise because the mind is constantly asking, "What does this say about me?" When that question loosens, the emotional charge softens too. Life still happens, but it doesn't have to pass through a fragile center that needs constant protection. Choosing yourself, then, becomes choosing not to take everything personally, not as a technique, but as a natural result of seeing more clearly. When there is less attachment to a fixed self, there is less to defend, less to prove, less to explain. Actions become simpler. You say no when no is true, not because it fits an identity, but because it respects reality. You say yes when yes is honest, not because you are trying to be liked. This kind of self-choice feels different from ego. Ego feels tight, defensive, loud. It needs confirmation. It needs to win. Liberation feels quiet, grounded, spacious. It does not rush to declare who it is. It does not argue for its worth. It acts, and then it lets go. You may notice this most clearly in moments of conflict. When someone misunderstands you, the old habit is to rush in with explanations, to correct the story, to restore the image. But when you are less invested in the image, you can pause. You can feel the discomfort without turning it into a performance. Sometimes you still speak, sometimes you don't. The choice comes from clarity, not fear. Non-self also changes how you relate to your inner world. Many people try to choose themselves by controlling their thoughts and emotions. They want to feel confident, calm, positive. But Buddhist wisdom suggests something more radical. Instead of trying to fix your inner experience, you stop claiming it as who you are. A thought arises, a feeling passes. You notice it, but you do not turn it into an identity. I am anxious. I am broken. I am behind. These statements lose their grip when you see thoughts as events, not truths. This doesn't mean you ignore your pain. It means you stop turning pain into a story about who you are. Pain can be present without defining you. Fear can arise without becoming your identity. When this happens, compassion naturally grows, both for yourself and for others. You see that everyone is reacting from conditions, from habits, from misunderstandings, not from fixed selves. Choosing yourself in this way requires courage, because it goes against how most of the world operates. Society rewards strong identities, clear positions, confident self-images. Letting go of these can feel like stepping into open space without a map, but what you gain is flexibility. You can change without feeling like you are betraying yourself. You can grow without having to destroy who you were. You can rest without guilt. Another quiet benefit of non-self is how it softens comparison. Comparison only works when there is a solid me measuring itself against solid others. When identity loosens, comparison loses meaning. You still see differences, but they don't threaten you. Someone else's success does not diminish you. Someone else's opinion does not define you. You stop living as a point on a scale and start living as part of a moving whole. This is why choosing yourself, in this deeper sense, often leads to unexpected alignment, not because life suddenly becomes easy, but because you stop fighting it with a false center. Decisions feel cleaner. Not perfect, but cleaner. You sense when something is out of alignment, not because it hurts your image, but but because it creates inner contraction. You move away from what tightens you toward what allows breath. It is important to understand that non-self is not something you force yourself to believe. It is something you observe. You notice how thoughts come and go, how moods shift, how even your sense of I changes depending on the situation. Over time, this observation weakens the habit of clinging. You don't have to destroy the self. You simply stop feeding it. When you choose yourself from this place, you are not choosing a version of you over others. You are choosing honesty over performance, presence over control, reality over illusion. And paradoxically, this makes you more responsive, not less, more engaged, not withdrawn. Because when you are not busy defending an identity, you have more energy to meet life as it is. This also reshapes responsibility. Without a fixed self to protect, responsibility becomes lighter and more sincere. You take responsibility for actions, not for being perfect. You apologize without collapsing. You adjust without self-hatred. You learn without turning every mistake into a verdict on your worth. Growth becomes natural instead of forced. There is a quiet dignity in this way of living. You no longer need to announce who you are. You show it through how you respond, through how you listen, through what you are willing to release. And release becomes a form of strength, not the strength of pushing, but the strength of not holding what no longer serves. As this understanding settles, you may notice a subtle relief, a sense that you don't have to keep up with your own story, that you don't have to be consistent with who you were yesterday. That choosing yourself does not mean choosing a side in an inner argument, but stepping out of the argument entirely. This is where the next shift begins. When the self loosens, something else becomes visible, a deep habit of seeking approval, a quiet hunger to be seen, validated, confirmed. It hides even in spiritual growth, even in kindness, and as long as that hunger remains unseen, it continues to shape your choices. What comes next is not about rejecting others, but about seeing how the need for their approval subtly pulls you out of alignment. As the grip of a fixed self begins to loosen, another pattern quietly comes into view. It doesn't shout. It doesn't announce itself. It hides behind good intentions and polite behavior. Yet it has been guiding many of your choices for years. The need to be approved of. The hope that someone, somewhere, will confirm that you are doing life correctly. This is where the next layer opens, because even without a solid self to defend, the habit of seeking validation can continue to pull you away from your own center. There is a certain tension that comes from waiting to be seen. It lives in small moments. You feel it when you check your phone after sending a message, when silence feels heavier than it should, when a compliment lifts you higher than expected, or a lack of response quietly drains your energy. These reactions seem harmless, but over time they shape your inner world. They train your nervous system to look outward for permission to rest. The hunger for approval often begins early. As children, survival depends on being accepted. Attention equals safety. Praise equals belonging. The nervous system learns this lesson well. But what once protected you does not always free you. As life expands, the old wiring remains, even when it no longer serves. You may grow independent on the surface, yet inside there is still a subtle scanning. Am I liked? Am I enough? Did I say the right thing? This hunger becomes suffering not because approval is bad, but because it places your inner stability in someone else's hands. When your sense of peace depends on reactions you cannot control, life becomes unpredictable in a painful way. You begin to shape yourself to avoid disapproval. You soften truths. You delay decisions. You stay longer than you should, all while telling yourself you are being kind, patient, understanding. Buddhist wisdom does not condemn this pattern. It simply invites you to see it clearly. Wanting approval is not a flaw, it is a habit, and like all habits, it continues only as long as it is not fully seen. The moment you notice how often your choices are guided by the desire to be accepted, a small space opens. In that space, freedom becomes possible. One of the most difficult truths to face is this: approval does not actually satisfy the hunger it feeds. It gives a brief sense of relief, then the craving returns. A compliment fades. A like loses its warmth. Validation must be renewed again and again. This is how subtle suffering operates. It does not feel dramatic. It feels normal, yet it keeps you leaning forward, never fully resting in yourself. Letting go of the identity that needs approval does not mean becoming cold or indifferent. It means removing approval from its role as judge and stabilizer of your worth. You can still appreciate recognition without depending on it. You can still enjoy connection without needing it to confirm your value. This shift changes how you move through the world. You may notice how often explanation is tied to approval. Explaining yourself is often an attempt to be understood so you can be accepted. You clarify, justify, soften, repeat. Not because clarity is needed, but because rejection feels unsafe. When you begin to trust your own inner alignment, the urge to explain weakens. Silence becomes less threatening. Misunderstanding becomes tolerable. Another place approval hides is in over-responsibility. You feel responsible not only for your actions, but for how others feel about them. If someone is disappointed, you assume you did something wrong. If someone is upset, you rush to fix it. This is not compassion. It is control disguised as care. True compassion respects the emotional autonomy of others. It allows them to have their experience without absorbing it as a verdict on your character. Releasing the need for validation also changes how you experience rejection. Rejection only hurts deeply when it confirms a fear you already carry. When approval is no longer the measure of your worth, rejection becomes information, not a sentence. It may still sting, but it does not collapse you. You can feel the discomfort without turning it into a story about being unlovable or unseen. This is where alignment begins to feel effortless, not because life suddenly agrees with you, but because you stop arguing with yourself. You stop asking the world to reflect you back correctly. You stand where you are, and that steadiness becomes its own confirmation. Decisions become clearer because they are no longer filtered through the question, "Will this make me acceptable?" It is important to notice how spiritual growth itself can become approval-seeking, wanting to be seen as wise, calm, evolved, wanting others to recognize your depth. This too creates tension. When your peace depends on being perceived a certain way, peace becomes fragile. Letting go here is subtle, but powerful. You practice without performing. You grow without advertising it. As approval loosens its grip, relationships change. Some deepen, others fall away. This is not a failure, it is a reorganization. Connections that were built on mutual validation may weaken. Connections that are grounded in honesty often strengthen. You may find that fewer people understand you, but those who remain feel more real. Less effort is needed to be present. There is also a physical aspect to this release. The body often carries the strain of approval-seeking, tight shoulders, shallow breath, a constant readiness to respond. As you stop scanning for acceptance, the body learns to settle. Breath deepens naturally. The nervous system exits alert mode. Rest becomes possible without permission. Letting go of approval does not happen through affirmation. It happens through observation. Each time you notice the urge to seek validation and choose not to act on it, something rewires. Not through force, but through familiarity, you learn that nothing collapses when approval is absent. Life continues. You remain intact. This also reshapes your relationship with success and failure. Success no longer proves you are worthy. Failure no longer proves you are not. Both become experiences rather than identities. You can succeed without inflation. You can fail without humiliation. This balance creates resilience that does not depend on praise. The quiet relief that comes from this shift is often underestimated. You stop rehearsing conversations. You stop revisiting moments to check if you were received well. Mental energy returns. Attention becomes available for what is actually happening. Presence replaces performance. As the need for approval fades, something else becomes clear. You begin to feel where your energy is truly meant to go. Choices that once felt confusing become obvious. Not because you have answers, but because you are no longer negotiating with external expectations. Inner signals become easier to hear when they are not drowned out by the noise of validation. This does not make you isolated, it makes you authentic, and authenticity carries a quiet authority. People may not always agree with you, but they feel the steadiness behind your actions. That steadiness does not demand agreement, it simply exists. There will be moments when the old habit returns, a desire to be praised, a discomfort with silence. This is not failure, it is conditioning, unwinding. Each time you notice without judgment, the habit weakens. You are not removing a part of yourself. You are freeing it from a role it was never meant to play. As life realigns around this release, you may notice a strange paradox. The less you seek approval, the more natural respect you receive. Not because you are trying, but because people sense when someone is no longer bargaining for acceptance. That energy feels grounded. It feels safe. This is not the end of wanting connection. It is the end of needing it to define you. From here, relationships become choices rather than lifelines. Presence becomes a gift rather than a strategy. And with that shift, a new kind of courage begins to form. Because when approval no longer governs your actions, you will sometimes disappoint others, not out of cruelty, but out of honesty. And learning to stand calmly in that discomfort opens the next doorway. When approval loosens its hold, something uncomfortable but honest rises to the surface. You begin to notice how often your peace was purchased by saying yes when your inner voice said no. How many of your choices were shaped not by truth, but by the quiet fear of letting someone down? This is the edge you now stand on. And what waits here is not cruelty or selfishness, but a form of strength most people never learn how to use. There is a particular tension that appears the moment you sense someone's expectation and feel it clash with your own clarity. The body reacts first. A tightening in the chest, a quickening of thought, the urge to smooth things over before discomfort fully forms. For years, this urge may have guided you automatically. You adjusted, you compromised, you postponed yourself. And it often felt like kindness. But kindness that requires self-erasure slowly turns into resentment, even if you never express it. Disappointing others consciously is not about rejection. It is about honesty without aggression. It is the decision to stop protecting others from feelings they are capable of experiencing. This is difficult because many people confuse disappointment with harm. But disappointment is not damage. It is a natural response to unmet expectations. And expectations, when examined closely, are rarely agreements. They are often assumptions. When you live from approval seeking, you treat other people's expectations as obligations. You carry them as if they were promises you made. But conscious disappointment begins when you realize you are not responsible for fulfilling unspoken demands. You are responsible for acting with integrity. And integrity sometimes means allowing others to feel discomfort without rushing to remove it. This shift changes how you see compassion. Compassion is often misunderstood as keeping everyone comfortable, but real compassion respects reality. It does not lie to preserve peace. It does not sacrifice truth to avoid tension. When you disappoint someone mindfully, you are offering them something honest instead of something convenient. That honesty may sting, but it does not deceive. One of the reasons disappointing others feels so threatening is because it often triggers old emotional memories. As children, disappointing caregivers could mean withdrawal of love or safety. That fear can remain long after the danger is gone. So when an adult faces the possibility of disappointing someone, the nervous system reacts as if survival is at stake. Understanding this helps you meet your fear with patience rather than judgment. Conscious disappointment requires slowing down. Instead of reacting to the discomfort, you pause. You feel the urge to explain, justify, soften, and you choose clarity instead. This does not mean being abrupt. It means being direct without cruelty. Simple words, honest tone, no hidden apology for existing. There is also a quiet dignity in not over-explaining. Over-explanation is often an attempt to manage someone else's emotional response. It says, "Please understand, so you won't be upset." But understanding cannot be forced. When you stop trying to control how your truth is received, you reclaim your energy. You offer your decision and allow the other person to have their reaction. This practice reveals something important. Many relationships are built on unspoken contracts. I will meet your expectations, and you will approve of me. When you break that contract, even gently, the relationship is tested. Some connections adapt, others dissolve. This is not a failure. It is information. It shows you where connection was rooted in authenticity and where it depended on self-suppression. Mindful disappointment also prevents long-term harm. Saying yes when you mean no does not protect relationships. It slowly poisons them. Resentment builds quietly. Distance grows. Authentic connection fades. Disappointing someone now, with honesty, is often kinder than betraying yourself repeatedly and calling it peace. There is an important difference between disappointing others and punishing them. Conscious disappointment does not seek to teach a lesson. It does not come from frustration or superiority. It comes from alignment. You are not pushing someone away. You are standing where you are. This practice also deepens self-trust. Each time you choose honesty over comfort, you send a signal inward. You tell yourself, I will not abandon you to avoid tension. Over time, this builds a sense of safety within. You become less afraid of conflict because you are no longer in conflict with yourself. Disappointing others consciously also refines communication. You begin to speak more clearly, earlier. You stop waiting until resentment forces honesty. You express limits before they harden into walls. This prevents unnecessary drama. It keeps situations simpler, even when they are uncomfortable. You may notice that some people react strongly when you stop meeting their expectations. This reaction is not always about you. It is often about loss of control. When someone is used to you accommodating them, your boundary can feel like rejection. Understanding this helps you stay grounded. You can hold compassion without collapsing your position. This does not mean you become rigid. Conscious disappointment includes listening. It includes empathy. You can acknowledge someone's feelings without taking responsibility for them. I hear that this is hard for you is not the same as I will change myself so you don't feel this. This distinction is subtle but life-changing. There is also a quiet humility in this practice. You accept that you will not always be liked, that you cannot be the version of yourself that satisfies everyone. This acceptance frees you from performing goodness. You no longer need to prove that your decision is reasonable or fair. You trust that your integrity is enough. As this becomes more natural, you may feel a new kind of calm during difficult conversations, not because they are easy, but because you are no longer divided inside. The fear is still there, but it no longer controls you. You speak from clarity rather than urgency. Conscious disappointment also reshapes generosity. You give when it is true, not when it is expected. This makes your yes meaningful again. People can feel the difference between a yes that is offered freely and one that is given under pressure. One builds connection, the other builds obligation. This way of living slowly changes your sense of identity. You stop seeing yourself as the one who keeps things smooth, the peacemaker at your own expense. Instead, you become someone who values truth and presence, someone who can hold discomfort without rushing to escape it. There will be moments when you disappoint someone you deeply care about. This can be painful, but pain does not mean wrong. Pain often means growth for both sides. When you allow others to meet your truth, you invite them into a more real relationship. Whether they accept that invitation is not something you can control. As you practice this, you may notice fewer inner negotiations, fewer rehearsals, fewer lingering regrets. You begin to trust that being honest now is easier than repairing self-betrayal later. Life simplifies when you stop managing everyone else's expectations. This practice also prepares you for a deeper level of alignment. When you no longer bend yourself to avoid disappointing others, you become more sensitive to another habit that quietly fragments you, the habit of explaining yourself endlessly, of justifying your existence. And as you stand more firmly in your truth, you may begin to feel the relief of not having to narrate every choice. That relief opens the door to a quieter power, one that does not announce itself, one that begins when you stop explaining and start simply being. After learning to disappoint others without abandoning yourself, a new sensitivity begins to form. You notice not only what you say yes or no to, but how much energy you spend defending those choices. Even when your decision is clear, there is often a second layer of effort, a need to explain, to justify, to make sure everyone understands your reasons so the discomfort will pass faster. This habit feels harmless, even polite, but it quietly pulls you out of alignment again. There is a moment most people recognize. You make a choice that feels right. For a brief second, there is calm. Then the mind rushes in. What if they misunderstand? What if they think I'm wrong, selfish, careless, ungrateful? And before the body has time to settle, words begin to pile up. Explanations, context, background, apologies disguised as clarity. The peace that was there a moment ago starts to fracture. Over-explaining is not communication, it is anxiety in motion. It is the nervous system trying to regain safety by controlling perception. Somewhere along the way, silence became dangerous. It began to feel like exposure, like standing without armor, so language became a shield. The more uncertain you felt, the more you talked. Alignment begins when you notice this pattern without trying to fix it immediately. You see how often explanations are offered not because they are needed, but because you are uncomfortable standing alone in your truth. Silence, in these moments, feels like abandonment of others or of yourself. Yet silence is often where integrity rests. When you explain yourself excessively, you split your attention. Part of you knows what is right. Another part is negotiating approval. This inner division is exhausting. You may say the right words, but something feels off. That feeling is misalignment. not because your choice was wrong, but because you stepped away from it to manage reactions. Silence does not mean withdrawal. It means restraint. It means trusting that not every decision requires a defense. It means allowing your actions to stand on their own. This is uncomfortable at first because many people were taught that being understood is the same as being safe. But understanding is not always possible, and chasing it can cost you your center. When you stop explaining, you may notice a rush of fear. It comes from moments when silence was met with punishment, withdrawal, or misunderstanding. But in the present, silence often reveals strength. It shows that you are no longer bargaining for acceptance. There is a difference between clarity and justification. Clarity is simple. It says what is true and stops. Justification keeps going. It circles. It adds layers. It tries to preempt every possible objection. The body knows the difference. Clarity feels grounded. Justification feels tense. Stopping the habit of explaining restores inner harmony because it brings your words back into alignment with your intention. You speak when there is something to say. You stop when there isn't. You no longer talk to fill space or soothe imagined disapproval. This conserves energy. It allows your nervous system to rest. This practice also changes how others relate to you. At first, some may push back. They are used to access, used to details, used to you translating yourself endlessly. When that stops, they may feel unsettled. They may ask for more. They may accuse you of being distant or unclear. This is where trust in yourself matters. You are not responsible for filling every gap in understanding. Silence is not absence. It is presence without performance. When you stop explaining, you allow others to meet you where you are instead of where you think they want you to be. Some will step closer. Others will step away. Both responses provide clarity. There is also a deep respect embedded in silence. It respects the intelligence of others. It assumes they can tolerate uncertainty. It assumes they can sit with discomfort. Over-explaining, on the other hand, can be subtly controlling. It tries to manage not only what is said, but how it is received. This does not mean you never clarify. It means you clarify once, cleanly, and then you stop. You notice when clarity has turned into self-defense, and you choose to end the conversation internally, even if it continues externally. You stop feeding the need to be understood. As this becomes more natural, you may notice a quieter confidence emerging. Not the confidence of having answers, but the confidence of not needing to convince. You begin to trust that your alignment does not depend on consensus. This trust stabilizes you. Stopping explanation also changes your relationship with guilt. Guilt often arises when silence leaves space for others to feel disappointed or confused. The urge to explain is often an attempt to erase guilt. But guilt does not disappear through justification. It dissolves through self-respect. When you honor your truth without excessive defense, guilt loses its power. There is a physical shift that accompanies this change. The jaw relaxes, the breath slows, the body no longer prepares for argument. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head. Mental noise decreases. This is not because life becomes simpler, but because you stop narrating it constantly. Silence also sharpens listening. When you are not busy explaining yourself, you can hear what is actually being said. Not just words, but tone, energy, need. You respond more accurately because you are present rather than reactive. Another subtle benefit is how silence protects intimacy. Over-explaining can flatten connection. It leaves little room for curiosity. When you allow space, relationships become more dynamic. Others can ask, they can reflect, They can meet you halfway instead of being guided through every thought. This practice also reveals how much identity was tied to being reasonable, articulate, and understood. Letting go of explanation can feel like letting go of competence. But competence does not require constant display. True competence is quiet. It acts without proving. As you stop explaining, you may encounter moments where you feel exposed, like standing without a script. This vulnerability is not weakness, it is alignment without armor. Over time, the fear softens. You realize that nothing essential is lost when words fall away. There is also a spiritual dimension to this silence. Buddhist wisdom often points to the truth that reality does not need commentary. Experience unfolds on its own. When you stop overlaying explanations, you come closer to direct experience. You respond to what is happening, not to the story about it. This does not mean becoming passive. It means becoming precise. Your words carry more weight because there are fewer of them. When you do speak, it is from clarity, not compulsion. You may notice that some conflicts dissolve faster when you stop explaining, not because they are resolved, but because you are no longer feeding them with anxious energy. Silence can de-escalate without agreement. It allows emotions to settle without being analyzed to death. This practice also strengthens boundaries. A boundary does not require justification to be valid. When you explain excessively, you weaken the boundary by implying it is negotiable. When you state it simply and stop, you reinforce it through presence. Over time, you may feel a deeper sense of alignment in daily life. Decisions feel cleaner. Regret lessens. You stop second-guessing yourself based on imagined reactions. Life becomes less about managing impressions and more about responding truthfully. This is not about becoming distant or cold. It is about becoming whole. When your inner and outer worlds match, there is less friction. Silence becomes a place of rest rather than threat. As this alignment stabilizes, another misunderstanding begins to dissolve. The belief that letting go means withdrawing from life. That renunciation requires distance from the world. What emerges next is a different understanding, one that shows how release can happen in the middle of ordinary life, without retreat, without escape. As silence becomes more familiar and explanation loosens its grip, a deeper question begins to surface. If you no longer need to perform, defend, or convince, what exactly are you meant to let go of next? Many people reach this point and assume the answer is withdrawal, less contact, less ambition, less life. But this assumption misses something essential. What unfolds now is not about leaving the world behind. It is about clearing what has been crowding your inner space while remaining fully present in your life. There is a quiet fear around the word renunciation. It sounds like loss, like denial, like turning your back on pleasure, connection, or meaning. Many picture monks walking away from everything familiar. But Buddhist wisdom points to something far more intimate and practical. Renunciation is not about abandoning life. It is about abandoning what weighs you down while you are living it. Inner clutter is subtle. It is not just objects or habits. It is expectations you carry that no longer fit, roles you continue to play long after they have stopped being true, desires that are inherited rather than chosen, stories about what should matter that keep you restless even when your life is full. This clutter does not announce itself as a problem. It disguises itself as responsibility, ambition, loyalty, or even virtue. Renunciation begins when you notice how crowded your inner world has become. Not crowded with activity, but with tension. You may have everything you once wanted and still feel compressed. The mind rarely rests. Even during moments of quiet, it plans, evaluates, revisits. This is not because you are doing something wrong, it is because too much is being held at once. Letting go, in this sense, is not dramatic, it is refined. You release what pulls your attention away from the present moment without actually enriching it. You stop feeding mental habits that create pressure without producing clarity. You question desires not by suppressing them, but by asking whether they truly serve peace. Renunciation as inner refinement means you stay engaged with your relationships, work, and daily life, but you stop demanding that they complete you. You stop loading them with expectations they cannot carry. When this happens, life becomes lighter without becoming smaller. One of the first things often released is the need to keep up, not just with others, but with your own imagined timeline, the pressure to be further along, to have resolved more, to have arrived somewhere definitive. This pressure creates a constant sense of insufficiency. Letting it go does not mean giving up on growth. It means allowing growth to unfold without urgency. Another layer of inner clutter is emotional hoarding, old resentments, unspoken disappointments, stories about how things should have been. These memories often feel justified. They may even feel necessary, but carrying them keeps you anchored to the past. Renunciation here means allowing experiences to end, not by forgetting, but by no longer replaying them as if resolution is still possible. This kind of release can feel strange at first. Without the familiar weight of resentment or longing, there may be a sense of emptiness. But this emptiness is not lack, it is space. And space is what allows something new to appear. Renunciation also touches desire itself. Not the natural desires for nourishment, connection, creativity, or rest, but the compulsive desires that promise fulfillment and deliver restlessness. The desire to be admired, to be ahead, to be certain. These desires never settle. They move the goalposts each time they are met. When you refine your inner world, you do not eliminate desire. You make it honest. You notice which desires come from fear and which come from genuine curiosity. You allow the first to soften and the second to guide you lightly. This process also changes your relationship with pleasure. Pleasure no longer needs to be maximized or defended. You enjoy what is present without clinging to it. You stop trying to extract happiness from moments. You let them pass naturally. This removes the anxiety that often accompanies enjoyment. Inner renunciation also includes releasing unnecessary self-judgment. Many people carry an internal critic that comments on everything: productivity, appearance, decisions. This voice claims to keep you accountable, but it often keeps you tense. Letting go here does not mean lowering standards. It means removing cruelty from the process of growth. As inner clutter clears, attention becomes sharper. You notice details you once missed, the texture of ordinary moments, the simplicity of breathing, the ease that comes from not needing to improve everything. This is not boredom. It is presence without friction. This refinement also affects how you relate to material things. Renunciation does not require owning nothing. It requires not being owned by what you have. You may still enjoy comfort, beauty, and convenience, but you no longer use them to regulate your worth or mood. They become tools rather than anchors. Relationships also shift under this understanding. You stay connected, but you stop grasping. You love without needing to secure the future. You care without trying to control outcomes. This creates a different quality of intimacy, less anxious, more spacious. There is also a renunciation of noise, not just external noise, but internal commentary, the constant evaluation of how life is going. When you release the habit of commentary, you experience life directly, without comparison, without narration. This is deeply restful. Inner refinement does not isolate you from the world. It makes you more responsive. Because you are not overloaded, you can meet situations as they arise. You respond instead of react. You engage without being entangled. This way of living also clarifies purpose. When inner clutter is reduced, what remains becomes obvious, not as a grand mission, but as a quiet pull. You sense where your energy naturally flows. You follow it without needing to justify it. Renunciation in this sense is ongoing. It is not a single decision, it is a continual noticing. Each time you feel inner contraction, you ask what you are holding that could be released. Not out of discipline, but out of care. This practice also teaches you that freedom does not come from escaping life's complexity. It comes from not carrying unnecessary weight through it. You still experience challenges, you still feel emotions, but they move through you instead of accumulating. As this refinement deepens, you may find yourself more present in simple tasks, washing dishes, walking, listening. These moments no longer feel like interruptions, they feel complete. This is a sign that renunciation is working quietly, without display. There is also humility in this path. You stop needing to be seen as detached or spiritual. You simply live with less inner friction. Others may notice a calm about you, or they may not. Either way, it no longer matters. Renunciation as inner refinement prepares the ground for the next layer of alignment. When the inner world is less crowded, reactions become clearer. You begin to see the space between stimulus and response. And in that space, a powerful choice becomes available. The choice to pause, to not react immediately, to respect yourself in moments of emotional intensity. That pause becomes the next doorway, where alignment moves from understanding into lived practice. As the inner world becomes less crowded, something important becomes easier to notice, the moment before you react. That small window that used to disappear without warning. When life pressed a button and your body answered before you had a say, now that space is visible, and inside it lives a choice that quietly changes everything. There is a familiar rush that comes with emotional reactivity, a surge of heat, a tightening in the chest, words lining up faster than thought, the urge to defend, correct, withdraw, or attack. For most of life, this has felt automatic, like weather. But it is not random, it is conditioned, and what is conditioned can be met with awareness. Choosing yourself in these moments does not mean suppressing emotion. It means refusing to hand over control to it. Pausing is not avoidance, it is respect. Respect for your body, your clarity, and the consequences of your actions. In Buddhist wisdom, this pause is not passive. It is active restraint rooted in understanding. Reactivity often feels justified because it carries urgency. It convinces you that something must be said or done now. That silence equals weakness. That delay equals loss. But urgency is rarely truth. It is the nervous system trying to protect itself using old strategies. When you pause, you give the system time to realize it is no longer in danger. This pause can be as brief as one breath, but that breath changes the direction of energy. Instead of moving outward in defense, attention turns inward. This is not easy. The body may resist, thoughts may argue, but staying present without reacting builds a strength that does not depend on dominance. Pausing interrupts the cycle of regret. How many times have you reacted and then spent hours replaying the moment, wishing you had said less, or said nothing, or waited? Each pause prevents future repair work. It protects your integrity before it needs fixing. This practice also deepens emotional intelligence. When you stop reacting immediately, you begin to notice what the emotion is actually asking for. Anger often wants protection. Fear wants safety. Sadness wants acknowledgement. Reacting rarely meets these needs. Pausing allows you to respond in a way that does. Choosing yourself here means choosing long-term alignment over short-term release. Reacting can feel relieving in the moment, but it often creates more tension later. Pausing may feel uncomfortable at first, but it reduces suffering overall. This is the kind of self-respect that is quiet and powerful. You may notice resistance to this idea, a belief that if you don't react, you are letting something slide, that you are allowing disrespect. But pausing does not mean agreeing. It means gathering yourself before acting. It gives you access to clearer boundaries, boundaries that are not fueled by emotion, but by truth. This shift changes conflict. Instead of escalating, conflict becomes informative. You see what touches a nerve. You see where old wounds are activated. This awareness allows healing rather than repetition. You stop fighting the same battles in different forms. Pausing also changes how you relate to your inner critic. Reactivity is not only external. You may react harshly to your own mistakes. Pausing here creates space for learning instead of punishment. You acknowledge what happened without turning it into an identity. The body plays a central role in this practice. Emotional reactivity is physical. Heart rate increases, muscles tense, breath shortens. Learning to pause means learning to listen to these signals without obeying them blindly. You stay with sensation until it passes. This teaches the body that intensity is survivable. Over time, the pause becomes more natural. You begin to trust it. You no longer fear that everything will collapse if you don't react immediately. This trust is earned through experience. Each time you pause and nothing terrible happens, your nervous system learns. This also affects how you experience others' emotions. When someone else reacts strongly, you are less likely to mirror it. You can remain grounded. This creates a stabilizing effect. Your calm becomes a reference point, not as control, but as presence. Choosing yourself in these moments also protects your energy. Reactivity drains you. It scatters attention. Pausing conserves energy. You act only when action is necessary. You speak only when words add clarity. This practice is not about perfection. You will still react sometimes. The difference is that you notice sooner. You recover faster. You do not spiral into self-judgment. Each pause strengthens the habit of awareness. There is also a moral dimension to this pause. Many harmful actions are the result of unexamined reactivity. By pausing, you reduce harm to yourself and others. This is not just self-care. It is ethical living. As this becomes integrated, you may notice fewer emotional highs and lows, not because you feel less, but because you are no longer thrown by every wave. You ride emotion instead of being dragged by it. This ability to pause also creates freedom in communication. You choose words deliberately. You listen fully. Conversations slow down. Understanding deepens. Pausing is an act of trust. Trust that clarity will come if you wait. Trust that you do not need to react to be real. Trust that self-respect does not require intensity. As this trust grows, another pattern becomes visible. You begin to see how familiar suffering can feel safer than uncertainty. How reacting keeps old pain alive because it is known. Letting go of reactivity invites something new. And that newness can be frightening. The next step is learning to release suffering you recognize, even when it feels like home. As pausing becomes part of how you meet life, a deeper pattern begins to reveal itself. You notice that even when you no longer react automatically, something still pulls you back into old emotional shapes. Not through explosions, but through familiarity. a quiet gravity that draws you toward the same disappointments, the same doubts, the same inner struggles you already know how to survive. This is where the work becomes subtle, because what holds you now is not chaos, but comfort in pain. There is a strange truth most people never name. Suffering that is familiar often feels safer than freedom that is unknown. Pain you understand gives you a role, a story, a sense of continuity. You know how to navigate it. You know what to expect from it. Letting it go can feel like stepping into emptiness without direction. Familiar suffering often wears the mask of identity. You may not consciously choose it, but it has shaped how you see yourself. The one who is always overlooked, the one who struggles, the one who carries more than others. Over time, these stories become anchors. They hurt, but they also ground you. Without them, you may wonder who you are. This is why people return to situations that wound them, why they replay the same arguments, why they stay in cycles that drain them. It is not because they enjoy pain. It is because pain they recognize feels predictable, and predictability feels safe to a nervous system trained by uncertainty. Releasing familiar suffering requires courage, because it asks you to give up what you know without promising immediate relief. The mind asks, if I let this go, what replaces it? And when no clear answer appears, fear arises. The suffering you carry becomes proof that you exist, that your experience matters, that your past was real. Buddhist wisdom points to this attachment gently. It does not shame the clinging. It understands that the mind seeks continuity, but it also shows that clinging to pain keeps life circling the same ground. Destiny does not realign through effort alone. It shifts when you stop feeding what keeps you bound. One of the most difficult things to release is emotional pain that has been justified, pain that feels earned, pain that feels meaningful. You may believe that letting it go dishonors what you went through, that if you stop hurting, you are pretending it didn't matter. But release is not erasure, it is completion. Pain becomes suffering when it is carried forward unnecessarily, when it is replayed, defended, explained. Letting go does not mean denying the past. It means refusing to let it dictate the present. This distinction is subtle, but essential. You may notice how often you revisit old wounds internally, not to heal them, but to confirm them. Each revisit reinforces neural pathways. The body relives what the mind repeats. Over time, this repetition becomes a default state. Peace begins to feel unfamiliar, even suspicious. There is also loyalty tied to suffering, loyalty to family patterns, to cultural narratives, to shared pain. You may fear that healing separates you from those who still hurt, that letting go creates distance. This fear can keep you bound to suffering long after it has served any purpose. Releasing familiar suffering does not happen through force. It happens through seeing clearly what it costs you, not in theory, but in daily life. You notice how it limits your choices, how it narrows your perception, how it colors neutral moments with old meaning. As awareness deepens, you may feel grief, not just for what happened, but for how long you have carried it. This grief is part of release. It honors the weight you bore without requiring you to keep carrying it. Letting go also requires trusting that you are more than your pain. This trust may feel fragile at first. Without suffering as a reference point, you may feel ungrounded, but this ungroundedness is temporary. It is the space where something new can form. The mind often resists release by saying, I need to understand this fully before I let it go. But understanding can become another delay. You can understand something endlessly and still be bound to it. Release begins when you decide that insight is no longer required for freedom. There is a quiet moment when you stop revisiting a story, not because you resolved it, but because it no longer calls you. This moment is not dramatic. It feels almost anticlimactic, yet it changes the direction of your life. Destiny realigns not through grand decisions, but through small acts of non-participation. You do not engage the old thought. You do not feed the old emotion. You let it pass without commentary. Over time, the pattern weakens. New pathways open. This process also reshapes hope. Hope is no longer about fixing the past. It becomes about staying present, about allowing life to unfold without dragging yesterday into today. This kind of hope is quiet, but steady. You may notice resistance from others when you release familiar suffering. They may be used to relating to you through that lens. Your healing may unsettle shared narratives. This does not mean you are wrong. It means you are changing. Letting go of pain also requires forgiving yourself, for not knowing sooner, for staying longer than you wish you had. Self-forgiveness dissolves the need to keep suffering as punishment. As familiar suffering loosens, you may experience moments of stillness that feel unfamiliar, without tension, without drama. These moments may feel empty at first, but if you stay with them, they reveal a deeper sense of ease. This ease is not excitement, it is alignment. Life feels less like a struggle and more like a flow of moments you can meet without armor. Releasing familiar suffering does not mean life becomes painless. Pain still arises, loss still happens, but suffering no longer defines you. It moves through you instead of shaping your destiny. As this courage settles into your body, another insight becomes clear. Sometimes, compassion does not mean staying close. Sometimes, love requires space, and learning to create distance without hardening your heart becomes the next refinement on this path. As the grip of familiar suffering starts to loosen, you begin to feel something new in your chest. Space. Not the empty kind that scares you, but the clear kind that tells the truth. And with that truth comes a quiet realization. Some of the pain you carried did not come from life itself, but from staying too close to what kept harming you, calling it love, calling it loyalty, calling it compassion. Now that you are no longer clinging to pain just because it is known, you can finally ask a question that changes the direction of your life. What if stepping back is not betrayal, but wisdom? There is a tenderness that forms when you grow. You become softer, more aware, more honest. And at first, you might think this softness means you should be able to handle anything. That spiritual maturity means endless patience, endless understanding, endless availability. But this is where many people get trapped again. They confuse compassion with self-abandonment. They think loving means staying close no matter what. They think distance is cold. They think boundaries are selfish. And because they don't want to be selfish, they keep sacrificing themselves in small, invisible ways until they don't recognize their own life anymore. Compassion is not the same as closeness. Compassion is the wish for beings to be free from suffering. Closeness is a behavior. You can wish someone well and still keep space. You can love someone and still say no. You can care deeply and still refuse to be dragged into the same cycle again. Buddhism does not teach you to become a sponge for other people's pain. It teaches you to see clearly what creates suffering and to stop feeding it. Sometimes the most compassionate act is to stop participating in what keeps someone stuck, even if they call your participation love as term. A painful truth is that some people do not want healing, not yet. Not because they are bad, but because their identity is built around their patterns, around blame, around control, around chaos, around being the victim of everyone else. And if you are the one who always rescues, always forgives too quickly, always explains their behavior for them, you may accidentally become part of the machine that keeps them the same. You might tell yourself you are being kind, but kindness that removes consequences often protects dysfunction, not people. Distance, when chosen consciously, is not punishment. It is clarity. It says, I will not hate you, but I will not lose myself in this. It says, I can hold compassion in my heart without offering my body, my time, my peace as proof. Many people think love must be proven through suffering. Buddhism gently corrects this. Love is not measured by how much you endure. Love is measured by how much truth you can hold without violence, including violence against yourself. This is where Buddhist compassion becomes powerful, because it is paired with wisdom. Compassion without wisdom becomes martyrdom. Wisdom without compassion becomes coldness. The balance is what frees you. Wisdom sees patterns. It sees causes and conditions. It sees that repeating the same closeness with the same person produces the same harm. And compassion says, I will not add more fuel. I will not pretend this is fine. I will not keep smiling while something in me breaks. Distance can look like many things. Sometimes it means leaving. Sometimes it means reducing contact. Sometimes it means not answering immediately. Sometimes it means refusing certain topics. Sometimes it means not engaging when the conversation turns manipulative. The form can change, but the inner principle stays the same. You are not required to remain accessible to what harms you in order to be a good person. A lot of guilt rises here. Guilt is one of the strongest chains. It whispers that you are abandoning someone, that you are being unkind, that you are becoming selfish. But guilt is not always a moral signal. Often, guilt is a trained response from old conditioning. It comes from being rewarded for self-sacrifice. It comes from roles like the responsible one, the peacemaker, the one who understands. When you step back, guilt appears because you are breaking an identity contract. The mind says, if I am not rescuing, who am I? In Buddhist practice, loving kindness is not emotional addiction. It is not attachment. It is not, I need you to need me. Loving kindness can exist with boundaries. You can wish a person peace while accepting that being close to them destroys your peace. This does not make your love smaller. It makes it cleaner. One reason people struggle with compassionate distance is because they confuse empathy with absorption. Empathy is the ability to understand and feel with someone. Absorption is when you take their emotions into your own nervous system as if they are yours to solve. Absorption makes you exhausted and resentful. It also keeps the other person dependent on your regulation. Empathy says, I see your pain. Absorption says, I will carry your pain. Buddhism points toward empathy with stability. You care without drowning. Another hidden trap is spiritual pride. Some people think they should be able to stay calm no matter how toxic someone is. They treat endurance like enlightenment. But calm is not proven by staying in harm's way. Calm is proven by choosing what is skillful. If you keep returning to a fire and calling it practice, you are not practicing wisdom. You are practicing self-neglect. Compassionate distance is also about non-attachment. Non-attachment does not mean you don't love. It means you stop clinging to a certain outcome. You stop clinging to the hope that your patience will finally change them. You stop clinging to the fantasy that if you explain better, love better, sacrifice more, they will wake up. That clinging is painful. It keeps you tied to someone's potential instead of their reality. When you let go, you are not giving up on them as a human being. You are giving up on your need to control their path. This is especially important with family. Many people feel they must stay close because of blood, history, duty. But Buddhism respects karma and conditions, not titles. A title does not cancel harm. Parent, sibling, partner, friend does not guarantee safety. If closeness brings repeated suffering, wisdom asks you to adjust the conditions. You can still be respectful. You can still be kind. But you can stop being available to the parts of them that destroy your balance. Distance can also be a gift to the other person. It removes the comfort of using you as a dumping ground. It removes the easy escape from their own consequences. Sometimes your presence lets them avoid facing themselves. When you step back, they may feel the discomfort they've been handing to you. That discomfort might finally teach them something, or it might not. But either way, you are no longer part of the cycle. A big fear here is the fear of being seen as the bad one. When you step away, some people will rewrite the story. They will call you selfish. They will tell others you changed. They will highlight your boundary as betrayal. This hurts because the old approval hunger still echoes. But this is where your earlier training matters. You learn to disappoint others consciously. You learn to stop explaining yourself. Now you learn to let people misunderstand you without chasing the story. This is not bitterness. This is peace. There is also a way to do distance wrongly. Distance can become avoidance. It can become punishment. It can become a wall built from anger. Buddhist distance is different. It is not powered by hatred. It is powered by clarity and care. You can step back while keeping your heart open. You can say no without wishing harm. You can leave without trying to destroy the other person. One helpful way to test your distance is to notice your inner state. If you step back and feel more honest, more stable, more present, that is wisdom. If you step back and feel tense, obsessive, focused on proving something, that may be ego or unresolved anger. Both can be worked with. The goal is not to be perfect. The goal is to be skillful. Compassionate distance also teaches you about responsibility. You are responsible for your actions, your choices, your boundaries. You are not responsible for saving people from the consequences of their behavior. Many people confuse responsibility with control. They think if they don't manage someone else's emotions, they are failing. But that is not responsibility. That is fear. Another layer of this teaching is how you treat yourself. If you are practicing compassion outwardly while being cruel inwardly, something is off. Loving without self-abandonment includes turning compassion inward. Not indulgence, not excuses, but kindness. You acknowledge your limits. You stop shaming yourself for being affected. You stop forcing yourself to tolerate what your body clearly rejects. Distance can also be internal, not just external. You may still need to interact with someone, but you stop taking their words as truth. You stop letting their mood dictate your mood. You stop arguing in your head after the conversation ends. You stop rehearsing how to win their approval. This internal distance is powerful. It means you are present, but not captured. Buddhism often speaks of the middle way. This applies here. The middle way is not staying close no matter what, and it is not cutting off everyone the moment you feel discomfort. The middle way is responding to reality with wisdom. Sometimes the wise move is more closeness. Sometimes it is less. Sometimes it is patience. Sometimes it is leaving. The middle way is not a rule. It is a living sensitivity. If you have been the one who always holds things together, distance will feel like breaking a promise. But many of those promises were never spoken. They were roles you inherited. You were praised for being easy, helpful, forgiving, strong, and you learned to equate love with sacrifice. Now, you are learning something more mature. Love can include limits. Love can include silence. Love can include space. This is where realignment becomes visible. When you stop abandoning yourself for connection, your life starts to reorganize around truth. You may lose certain dynamics, but you gain your energy back. You gain your sleep back. You gain your clarity back. And with clarity, you start to notice who and what truly supports your growth. Some people will meet your new boundary with respect. Others will escalate. They will test you. They will guilt you. They will act like your distance is cruelty. This is where you practice the quiet strength of the pause again. You don't react. You don't explain endlessly. You state what is true, and you stop. You let discomfort exist without trying to fix it. This is not coldness. This is freedom. Compassionate distance is also preparation for something even deeper: detachment from outcomes. Because once you can love without abandoning yourself, you start to see that your peace cannot depend on whether people approve, change, understand, or stay. You can do what is right and still be misunderstood. You can act with kindness and still be judged. And the final lesson in this area is learning to release the outcome while staying true to the intention. That is where alignment becomes effortless, because you stop trying to control life's response to your choices. As compassionate distance becomes possible, something even more subtle reveals itself. You realize that even when you act with clarity, even when you love without abandoning yourself, there is still a quiet tension inside. A tension tied not to what you do, but to what you hope will happen next. You notice how often your peace waits at the end of a result, how relief is postponed, how alignment feels conditional. This is where the deepest form of self-choice begins, not through control, but through release. There is a certain heaviness that comes from caring too much about outcomes, not caring deeply, but gripping tightly, wanting things to land a certain way, wanting people to respond correctly, wanting your effort to be rewarded, wanting clarity to guarantee comfort. This grip is subtle. It often disguises itself as responsibility, ambition, or love. But beneath it is fear. Fear that if things do not turn out as expected, something about you will be threatened. Detachment from outcomes does not mean indifference. It means separating your inner stability from external results. It means choosing to act with integrity without demanding a specific payoff. This is one of the hardest practices, because the mind is trained to measure worth through results. Success feels like proof. Failure feels like exposure. Detachment asks you to step out of that measurement system entirely. This does not happen overnight. At first, you may still feel the pull of expectation. You do the right thing and wait. You speak honestly and scan for reaction. You set a boundary and brace yourself for response. This is natural. The nervous system wants closure. It wants to know if the choice was safe. Detachment begins when you notice this waiting and choose not to follow it. Buddhist wisdom teaches that suffering arises not from action, but from attachment to the fruits of action. You can plant seeds carefully and still accept that weather exists. You can show up fully and still accept that outcomes are not yours to command. When you internalize this, something relaxes. You stop fighting reality for confirmation. One reason outcome attachment is so exhausting is because it splits your attention. Part of you is present in the moment. Another part is projecting into the future, evaluating, predicting, adjusting. This split creates anxiety. When you detach, attention returns to where your power actually is, in the action itself. Detachment also restores clarity. When you are attached to a result, perception narrows. You filter information based on whether it supports your desired outcome. You miss signals. You overreact to obstacles. When you release the outcome, you see more clearly. You respond to what is actually happening rather than what you hope will happen. This clarity is not cold, it is grounded. It allows you to adjust without panic, to change direction without shame, to continue without desperation. You no longer need the universe to cooperate in a specific way for you to remain steady. Detachment from outcomes also transforms effort. Effort becomes clean. You do what is skillful because it is skillful, not because it guarantees success. This kind of effort is sustainable. It does not burn you out. It does not collapse when results are slow or invisible. Many people fear detachment because they think it will kill motivation. But the opposite is true. Attachment creates tension. Detachment creates flow. When you are not constantly checking whether things are working, you can stay engaged longer. You become more creative, more responsive, less rigid. This practice also changes how you experience disappointment. Disappointment hurts most when it feels like a verdict on your value or intelligence. When you detach, disappointment becomes information. It tells you something about conditions, timing, or approach. It does not tell you who you are. Detachment also protects relationships. When you stop needing specific responses, you stop pressuring others to meet your expectations. Conversations become lighter. Presence becomes more genuine. You allow people to be who they are without using their behavior to regulate your emotional state. This does not mean you tolerate harm. Boundaries remain, but they are not enforced with the hope of changing someone. They are enforced because they are true. Whether the other person understands or accepts them becomes secondary. Detachment from outcomes also deepens trust. Not blind trust, but trust in process. You trust that acting with integrity will shape your life in ways you cannot fully predict. You trust that alignment does not require constant supervision. This trust is tested in moments of uncertainty, when you take a step without knowing where it leads, when you speak truth without knowing the cost, when you leave something familiar without a clear replacement. Detachment allows you to move anyway, not recklessly, but with openness. There is also grief in this practice. You grieve the fantasy that if you do everything right, life will reward you accordingly. Letting go of this fantasy is painful, but it is also liberating. You stop bargaining with reality. Detachment also changes how you relate to time. You stop rushing results. You stop measuring progress constantly. You allow things to unfold at their own pace. This reduces stress and increases patience. This practice requires humility. You accept that you cannot see the whole picture, that outcomes are influenced by countless factors beyond your control. It keeps you flexible. As detachment deepens, you may notice a quiet joy, not excitement, but ease. You enjoy effort for its own sake. You find satisfaction in presence. You stop postponing peace. This ease also makes you more effective. When you are not attached, you can make hard decisions without panic. You can let go when something is not working. You can persist when something matters without clinging. Detachment also protects you from bitterness. When outcomes disappoint, you do not turn against yourself or others. You accept what happened without turning it into blame. This is the ultimate self-choice, because it places your well-being back in your own hands, not by controlling the world, but by choosing how you relate to it. You stop outsourcing your peace to results. As this understanding settles, another subtle pattern becomes visible. Even spiritual practice can become a performance. Even goodness can become a strategy to secure outcomes. And when that happens, something true gets lost. The next step is learning to release the need to be seen as good, kind, or evolved. Because real alignment does not need an audience. As attachment to outcomes loosens, another quiet habit comes into focus. It hides behind good intentions. It wears the mask of kindness, patience, and spiritual maturity. You may even feel proud of it. yet it creates a subtle tension that never fully releases. This habit is the need to be seen as good, and until it is seen clearly, it quietly pulls you out of truth. There is a particular way people learn to behave when they step onto a spiritual path. They soften their voice, they choose the right words, they try to be calm, understanding, evolved. On the surface, this looks like growth, but underneath, something familiar is still operating. The hunger for approval has simply changed costumes. Instead of wanting to be liked, you want to be seen as wise. Instead of wanting praise, you want recognition for being kind, patient, or awakened. This is spiritual people-pleasing, and it is one of the last habits to dissolve because it feels virtuous. You may tell yourself you are being compassionate when you stay silent about a truth. You may call it acceptance when you swallow discomfort. You may label avoidance as peace. But when goodness is performed instead of lived, something essential is lost. Trying to be good becomes a problem when it replaces honesty, when your actions are shaped more by how they will be perceived than by what is true. This does not mean goodness itself is wrong. It means goodness, used as an identity, becomes another attachment, and like all attachments, it creates suffering. One of the clearest signs of spiritual people-pleasing is inner tension. You say the right thing, but your body tightens. You act kindly, but resentment simmers. You forgive quickly, but something feels unresolved. This tension is not a failure, it is feedback. It tells you that alignment has been traded for appearance. Buddhist wisdom does not ask you to be good, it asks you to be clear. Clarity naturally leads to ethical action, but it does not demand performance. When you act from clarity, kindness arises without effort. When you act from image, kindness becomes exhausting. Spiritual people-pleasing often comes from fear. Fear of being judged as unkind, fear of being seen as unspiritual, fear of losing belonging within a community or identity. These fears are understandable. Belonging matters. But when belonging requires self-betrayal, the cost is high. Authenticity is not always gentle. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it is firm. Sometimes it is uncomfortable. Trying to always be nice flattens the full range of truth. You may avoid difficult conversations because they do not fit the image of peace you want to maintain. But unresolved truth does not disappear. It accumulates. Karma, in Buddhist understanding, is not punishment. It is momentum, patterns created by intention and action. When you act against your inner truth to maintain an image, you create inner friction. That friction becomes karma. It repeats because it has not been resolved at the root. Authenticity heals karma because it stops the repetition. When your inner and outer worlds align, momentum changes. You no longer generate the same conflicts internally, so they stop manifesting externally. This is not magic. It is cause and effect. Spiritual people-pleasing also distorts compassion. You may prioritize appearing compassionate over actually being helpful. You may avoid setting boundaries because you want to be seen as accepting. But compassion without boundaries often enables harm. Authentic compassion is responsive, not performative. Another sign of this habit is moral comparison. You may quietly measure yourself against others. Who is more patient, more detached, more awakened? This comparison feeds identity. It keeps the mind busy with ranking rather than presence. True practice has no scoreboard. Letting go of the need to be good means allowing yourself to be real. Real includes uncertainty. Real includes limits. Real includes moments of firmness that may not look spiritual, but real is clean. It does not leave residue. There is also grief here. You may grieve the image you worked hard to maintain, the role of the calm one, the wise one, the healer. Letting this go can feel like losing protection, but what you gain is freedom. You no longer have to act a part. This shift also changes how you relate to mistakes. When you are attached to being good, mistakes threaten your identity. You defend, you justify, you hide. When authenticity matters more than image, mistakes become opportunities to learn. You acknowledge them without collapse. Spiritual people-pleasing often keeps you from expressing anger or discomfort. You may label these emotions as unspiritual, but suppressing them does not dissolve them. It pushes them underground, where they influence behavior indirectly. Authenticity allows emotions to be felt without acting them out destructively. This does not mean indulging every impulse. It means not pretending they do not exist. Awareness transforms energy. Suppression distorts it. When you stop trying to be good, your actions become simpler. You help when you can. You say no when you can't. You rest without guilt. You speak honestly without cruelty. You stop managing how you are seen. This also affects your relationship with teachers, teachings, and traditions. You stop trying to embody ideals perfectly. You engage sincerely. You question when needed. You integrate what resonates. This creates a living practice rather than a rigid one. Authenticity also deepens humility. You accept that you are still learning, still conditioned, still human. This humility softens judgment toward others. You no longer need to be above anyone. As this practice matures, you may notice fewer inner contradictions, less self-monitoring, less spiritual performance, more ease, more groundedness. This does not make you passive. It makes you trustworthy to yourself. Your yes means yes. Your no means no. Your kindness is not strategic. Your silence is not avoidance. Karma heals not because you are trying to be pure, but because you stop lying to yourself. Truth interrupts cycles. It dissolves confusion. It aligns intention with action. There will be moments when authenticity costs you approval. You may be misunderstood. You may disappoint others who preferred your agreeable version. This is where earlier lessons support you. You have learned to disappoint consciously, to stop explaining, to detach from outcomes. Authenticity also brings a new kind of peace. Not the peace of being liked, but the peace of being whole. You no longer split yourself into acceptable and unacceptable parts. You meet yourself honestly. This honesty also makes compassion cleaner. You help without needing to be seen. You care without needing credit. You withdraw when needed without guilt. Spiritual people-pleasing ends when practice becomes lived rather than displayed, when truth matters more than image, when alignment replaces performance. As this alignment deepens, another attachment becomes visible. Even kindness itself can become an identity. Even moral goodness can bind the mind. And the next refinement is learning to let go of the need to be seen as kind at all. Because when kindness is no longer an image to protect, it becomes effortless. As authenticity replaces performance, something even quieter begins to loosen. You are no longer trying to look spiritual. You are no longer trying to be good in a general sense. Yet, there may still be a subtle grip inside, a wish to be seen as kind, a hope that others recognize your goodness. This attachment is delicate, almost invisible, because kindness feels like the safest place to stand. But even this can bind the mind when it becomes an identity instead of a natural response. There is a certain warmth that comes from being seen as kind. It brings acceptance. It brings a sense of being on the right side of things. Over time, this warmth can turn into dependence. You may begin to measure your actions by how kind they appear rather than how true they are. You may soften your honesty, delay your boundaries, avoid necessary discomfort, all to preserve an image that feels morally safe. This does not happen because you are dishonest. It happens because kindness has been rewarded. Somewhere along the way, you learned that being kind meant being good, and being good meant being worthy of love. That lesson sinks deep, so deep that even when you let go of approval, outcomes, and spiritual performance, the mind may still cling to moral identity as its last refuge. Buddhist wisdom invites a radical honesty here. Kindness that is attached to identity is not free. It comes with fear. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of being judged as harsh, fear of losing the moral high ground. These fears shape behavior subtly. You may not say what needs to be said. You may not leave when you should. You may not protect your energy because doing so could make you look unkind. The mind binds itself when it needs to be seen as good. Every interaction becomes a test. Am I being kind enough? Did that sound gentle? Was that too firm? This constant monitoring creates tension. Not outwardly, but inwardly. And tension is a sign that alignment is compromised. True kindness does not require observation. It does not need witnesses. It does not need to be named. It arises naturally when the heart is clear. But when kindness becomes something you are trying to maintain, it becomes heavy. You carry it like a badge that must not be scratched. One of the hardest truths to accept is that sometimes the most skillful action does not look kind on the surface. Saying no may feel cold. Leaving may look selfish. Silence may be interpreted as indifference. If your identity depends on being seen as kind, these actions become almost impossible, not because they are wrong, but because they threaten the image you are protecting. Attachment to moral identity also creates subtle judgment. When you see yourself as kind, you may unconsciously divide the world into kind and unkind, awake and asleep, conscious and unconscious. This division feeds separation. It keeps the ego alive under the appearance of virtue. Buddhist practice does not aim to make you morally superior. It aims to free you from clinging. When you cling to being kind, you cling to a self-concept. And any self-concept, even a positive one, creates suffering because it must be defended. You may notice how quickly discomfort arises when your kindness is questioned. When someone accuses you of being selfish or uncaring, something tightens. The urge to explain returns. The urge to prove your good intentions resurfaces. This reaction reveals attachment. If kindness were free, misunderstanding would not shake you so deeply. Letting go of the need to be seen as kind does not make you cruel. It makes you honest. Honesty allows kindness to take many forms. Sometimes that form is warmth. Sometimes it is firmness. Sometimes it is distance. Sometimes it is refusal. There is a difference between kindness and niceness. Kindness seeks well-being. Niceness avoids discomfort. Kindness may create it. When you release moral identity, you are no longer limited to niceness. You can act in ways that truly reduce suffering, even if they are misunderstood. This release also heals self-judgment. When you no longer measure yourself against an image of kindness, you stop punishing yourself for being human. You allow yourself to feel irritation without shame. You allow yourself to rest without guilt. You allow yourself to say no without self-attack. Attachment to being kind often keeps people in harmful situations. They tell themselves they are being compassionate by staying. But compassion that destroys your health, clarity, or dignity is not wisdom. Letting go of the image of kindness allows you to choose what is actually skillful. This does not mean acting without care. It means caring without attachment. You still consider impact. You still listen. You still act with awareness, but you are not paralyzed by how your actions will be labeled. Another subtle effect of moral identity is how it distorts giving. You may give when it is not sustainable. You may overextend. You may say yes out of obligation. This creates imbalance. When you release the need to be seen as kind, giving becomes cleaner. You give when it is true. You stop when it is not. There is also freedom in no longer being the good one. You do not have to mediate every conflict. You do not have to absorb everyone's emotions. You do not have to fix what is not yours to fix. This frees energy for what truly matters. Letting go here can feel risky. You may worry that without the identity of kindness, you will become harsh or indifferent. But this fear misunderstands your nature. Kindness does not come from identity. It comes from awareness. When awareness is present, harm feels unnatural. Buddhist teachings often point out that clinging to virtue can be as binding as clinging to vice. Both reinforce the sense of a self that must be maintained. Liberation comes from releasing both. You act ethically, not because you are a good person, but because clarity sees what reduces suffering. As this understanding settles, you may notice a lightness in interactions. You are no longer trying to come across a certain way. You respond, you listen, you act. Then you let go. There is less mental residue. This also deepens humility. You stop assuming your way is the kind way. You stay open to learning. You allow yourself to be wrong. This openness prevents rigidity. Letting go of moral identity does not mean abandoning values. It means embodying them without attachment. Values guide action, but they do not define the self. This distinction is subtle but powerful. When kindness is no longer an image, it becomes fluid. It adapts to context. It responds to reality. It does not insist on being recognized. This is why it feels natural and effortless. As this release integrates, inner conflict reduces further. You are no longer fighting to maintain a certain version of yourself. You move with greater ease. Decisions feel cleaner. Regret lessens. This is another step in leaving the inner battlefield. You stop arguing with yourself about who you should be. You stop policing your own behavior through moral fear. You trust awareness to guide you. And when this trust deepens, something remarkable happens. The war between who you are and who you think you should be begins to dissolve. The constant inner negotiation quiets. And that quiet opens the next doorway, where alignment no longer requires effort, because the conflict that demanded effort is no longer there. As the need to be seen as kind loosens, something deeper finally becomes visible. Not another habit, not another identity to drop, but a constant tension you may have lived with for so long that it felt normal. A silent war happening inside you, a war between who you are in this moment and who you believe you should be. And until this war ends, alignment will always feel temporary. There is a quiet exhaustion that comes from living in opposition to yourself. You wake up already measuring, already correcting, already negotiating. One part of you feels, wants, reacts, rests. Another part watches closely, judging, adjusting, comparing. This inner split drains more energy than any external struggle, and most people never question it. They assume this tension is discipline, or growth, or responsibility. But it is conflict. The inner battlefield is built from expectations. Expectations absorbed from parents, culture, teachers, peers, and even spiritual ideals. Somewhere along the way, you learned that who you naturally are is not enough, that you must become something else. Calmer, more productive, kinder, less emotional, more disciplined, more evolved. These ideas were not meant to harm you, but when they harden into identity, they create division. This division shows up as constant self-correction. You feel something, then immediately question it. You want something, then shame it. You react, then attack yourself for reacting. Life becomes a series of internal interruptions. You are never fully here, because part of you is always trying to replace the present version of you with a better one. Choosing yourself means stepping out of this war, not by winning it, but by refusing to fight. You stop treating your present experience as an enemy that must be fixed before it is allowed. You stop postponing self-acceptance until some imagined future version arrives. This does not mean giving up on growth. It means changing the relationship with growth. Growth stops being a rejection of who you are and becomes a natural unfolding. You still learn, you still refine, but you do not do it from self-contempt. The battlefield is fueled by comparison. You compare yourself to ideals, to others, to past versions of yourself. Every comparison creates distance. Distance between where you are and where you think you should be. That distance becomes tension, and tension becomes suffering. When you leave the battlefield, comparison loses its grip, not because you are better than it, but because you no longer need it. You stop using external measures to decide whether you are allowed to rest, to feel, to exist as you are. One of the hardest things to accept is that you do not need to resolve yourself before you are worthy of peace. The mind resists this. It says, "But if I stop pushing, I'll stagnate." This fear misunderstands how growth works. Growth does not come from pressure. It comes from attention, from curiosity, from presence. The inner war is also maintained by language. The way you talk to yourself matters. I should be better. I shouldn't feel this way. I need to fix myself. These phrases assume a broken self. When you notice them, you are already halfway out of the battlefield. Leaving the inner battlefield begins with allowing your current experience to exist without immediate correction. You feel anger without labeling it failure. You feel sadness without trying to upgrade it into gratitude. You feel confusion without rushing toward clarity. This allowance does not trap you, it frees you. The war also shows up in productivity. Many people measure their worth by output. When they rest, guilt appears. When they slow down, self-criticism rises. This is the battlefield in action. Choosing yourself here means allowing rest to be rest, not preparation for doing more. Another layer of the battlefield is spiritual striving, the constant attempt to transcend human experience, to be above fear, desire, attachment. This striving creates a split between the spiritual ideal and the lived reality. When you leave the battlefield, spirituality becomes grounded. You stop trying to escape being human and start meeting it with awareness. This shift changes how you relate to mistakes. Mistakes stop being evidence that you are failing at being who you should be. They become part of learning. You correct without condemning. You adjust without collapsing. The battlefield also thrives on future projection. You live for the day when you will finally be enough, when you will finally arrive. That day never comes, because the mind always moves the target. Leaving the battlefield means stepping out of this endless postponement. You allow yourself to arrive here. This does not mean settling for less. It means settling into reality. And from reality, effective action becomes possible. You respond to what is actually happening instead of fighting what already is. One of the most healing moments is realizing that you do not need to earn your own acceptance. You have been trying to prove something to yourself. That proof is never sufficient because the judge is also the accuser. When you step out of that role, something softens. Ending the inner war also changes how you relate to others. When you are no longer fighting yourself, You stop projecting expectations outward. You become less controlling, less judgmental, more present. Not because you are trying to be better, but because tension has reduced. This practice also reveals how often self-improvement has been driven by fear. Fear of being unlovable, fear of being left, fear of being ordinary. When you see this, compassion naturally arises, not as an identity, but as a response. Choosing yourself means choosing peace over perfection. It means valuing alignment over image. It means allowing your life to be lived from the inside out, rather than from a set of standards imposed from outside. There will be moments when the battlefield tries to return. Old voices, old habits, old comparisons. This is not failure, it is conditioning surfacing. Each time you notice and choose not to engage, the battlefield loses ground. Leaving the inner war does not make you passive, it makes you effective. Energy once spent on self-conflict becomes available for presence, creativity, and care. You may notice a deep relief, a sense that you no longer have to monitor yourself constantly, that you can trust your awareness to guide you without force. This trust is the foundation for everything that follows, because once the inner war ends, boundaries become clearer, silence becomes safer, stillness becomes a refuge rather than a threat. And from that stillness, something new begins to function as a boundary, not a wall, not a defense, but a quiet presence that does not need to explain itself. That presence becomes the next refinement, where stillness itself protects you without effort. When the inner battlefield quiets, something unexpected happens. The mind no longer feels crowded with arguments, defenses, or corrections. There is space. And within that space, a new kind of strength begins to form, not loud, not forceful, almost invisible. This is where stillness stops being just a state of mind and starts becoming protection. Most people think boundaries must be spoken, explained, enforced. They picture firm words, clear rules, decisive actions, and sometimes those are needed. But there is another kind of boundary that works before words are required. A boundary that does not push away, but does not allow intrusion either. That boundary is inner silence. Stillness becomes a boundary when you no longer rush to respond to everything that touches you, when every comment, demand, or emotion from others no longer pulls you into reaction. Silence, in this sense, is not withdrawal. It is presence without leakage. You are here, but you are not open to being invaded. This kind of stillness grows naturally once the inner war has ended. When you are no longer fighting yourself, you no longer feel the need to defend yourself constantly. Defense relaxes, and in that relaxation, clarity sharpens. Inner silence is often misunderstood as weakness. People fear that if they do not speak up immediately, they will be overrun. That silence equals agreement. That calm equals submission. But silence that comes from alignment is not passive. It is deliberate. It holds ground without tension. When you are still inside, you feel less urgency to explain, justify, or correct. You can hear what is being said without absorbing it. You can feel emotional pressure without acting on it. This changes the dynamic instantly. Many interactions rely on reaction to continue. When reaction is absent, the pattern breaks. Stillness protects you because it prevents unnecessary engagement. Not every comment needs a response. Not every provocation deserves attention. Not every emotion from others needs to be met with your energy. Silence filters what enters your system. This is especially powerful in emotionally charged environments. When someone is agitated, controlling, or seeking a reaction, stillness can feel unsettling to them. Not because you are doing something wrong, but because you are no longer playing your assigned role. You are not escalating. You are not defending. You are not feeding the loop. Inner silence also protects you from your own habits. The habit of overthinking, of rehearsing conversations, of replaying moments. When stillness becomes familiar, the mind learns to rest sooner. Thoughts arise, but they do not take over. This conserves enormous energy. There is a bodily aspect to this boundary. When you are still inside, your posture changes, your breath deepens, your nervous system signals safety. Others can feel this, even if they do not understand it. Calm presence communicates without words. Stillness also refines listening. You hear what is said beneath the words. You notice tone, intention, and energy. This allows you to respond accurately rather than reflexively. Sometimes, the most protective response is no response at all. This does not mean suppressing expression. It means choosing expression consciously. When you speak from stillness, your words carry weight. They are fewer, clearer, and less reactive. You do not argue to be heard. You speak because it is true. One of the reasons stillness is such a powerful boundary is because it cannot be manipulated easily. People can push against words. They can debate reasons. They can challenge explanations. But silence rooted in clarity offers no handle. It does not escalate. It does not collapse. It simply remains. Stillness also prevents emotional contagion. In many relationships, emotions pass back and forth unconsciously. Someone brings anxiety, you absorb it. Someone brings anger, you mirror it. When you are still, emotions stop spreading automatically. You remain yourself. This is not emotional numbness. You still feel, but feeling does not turn into identification. You experience emotion without becoming it. This creates a buffer between experience and action. Inner silence also strengthens boundaries with time and attention. You stop feeling obligated to respond immediately. You stop filling every gap. You allow pauses. These pauses protect your mental space. They give you time to sense what is right before acting. As stillness becomes familiar, you may notice that fewer people try to cross your boundaries. Not because you have become intimidating, but because your presence is clear. You are not available for chaos. You are not easily pulled. This clarity is felt. Stillness also protects your values. When you are calm inside, you are less likely to compromise under pressure. You can say no without aggression. You can say yes without fear. Decisions arise from alignment rather than urgency. There is also a deep self-trust that grows here. You trust that you do not need to manage everything. You trust that you can wait. This trust removes the panic that often leads to boundary violations. Many people fear stillness because it feels like nothing is happening. But stillness is full. It is alert. It is aware. It notices more, not less. From this awareness, you can act precisely. Stillness also allows you to tolerate discomfort without escaping it. When someone is unhappy with you, you can stay present without rushing to fix it. This does not make you uncaring. It makes you grounded. You allow others to have their experience without absorbing it as your responsibility. This kind of boundary is especially important for those who are sensitive, empathetic, or intuitive. Without stillness, sensitivity becomes overwhelm. With stillness, sensitivity becomes insight. Inner silence also changes how you relate to conflict. You no longer need to win or resolve everything immediately. You can let situations unfold. You can disengage when engagement is not skillful. This reduces unnecessary drama. Stillness is also protective because it keeps you connected to your body. When you are quiet inside, you notice subtle signals: tightness, ease, expansion. These signals guide you more accurately than mental analysis. There is also humility in stillness. You accept that you do not have to have an opinion on everything. You do not have to respond to every narrative. This humility keeps you free. As this boundary strengthens, you may notice a new simplicity in your life. Fewer conflicts, fewer explanations, less emotional residue after interactions. You recover faster, you rest more deeply. This does not mean life becomes silent. It means silence becomes available, and that availability changes everything. Stillness also prepares you for a deeper understanding of guilt. Because when you stop reacting and start holding silence, guilt often appears. Guilt for not responding, for not fixing, for not engaging. This guilt is not truth, it is conditioning. Learning to sit with that guilt without acting on it is another form of protection. You see that nothing collapses when you do not perform. Life continues, relationships adjust. As inner silence becomes a trusted boundary, you stop leaking energy. You stop carrying conversations long after they end. You stop defending yourself in your mind. This creates spaciousness. From this spaciousness, alignment becomes effortless. You are no longer constantly responding to the world. You are meeting it from a stable center. And in this stability, another layer becomes visible. Even guilt itself begins to look different. You start to see how often guilt has been used to control your choices, how it has masqueraded as morality. And the next step in choosing yourself is understanding that guilt is often learned, not true. Releasing it opens the door to saying no without inner punishment, and to living with a freedom that no longer needs defense. As stillness becomes a natural boundary, another inner signal grows louder. Not fear, not doubt, but guilt. It often arrives quietly, right after you choose not to respond, not to engage, not to give more than you have. Guilt tries to pull you back into old patterns. It whispers that you are doing something wrong simply because you are no longer doing what was expected. And this is where alignment is tested in a deeper way. Guilt has a powerful presence in many lives. It feels heavy, authoritative, moral. But most guilt is not born from truth. It is learned, conditioned, passed down through families, cultures, and systems that equated obedience with goodness. Over time, this conditioning became internalized. You no longer need someone to tell you that you should give more, tolerate more, explain more. The voice lives inside you now. Saying no without guilt feels almost unnatural at first. The body tightens, the mind searches for justification. You may feel the urge to soften your refusal, to add excuses, to promise future availability. This urge is not kindness. It is fear wearing polite clothing, fear of being judged, fear of being rejected, fear of being seen as selfish. Understanding guilt as a learned illusion changes how you relate to it. Instead of treating guilt as a command, you begin to see it as a signal that an old rule has been activated, a rule that once kept you safe by securing approval or belonging. That rule may no longer apply, but the feeling remains. Many people confuse guilt with conscience, but they are not the same. Conscience arises from clarity. It points to harm. Guilt arises from conditioning. It points to disobedience. One is rooted in awareness, the other in fear. Learning to tell the difference is essential for alignment. When you say no from clarity, there is a sense of rightness, even if discomfort follows. When you say no and feel guilt, it does not automatically mean you are wrong. It often means you are changing. The nervous system is adjusting to a new pattern. Old alarms go off even when no danger exists. Guilt has been used as a social glue. It keeps people compliant, predictable, easy to manage. When you step out of this system, Guilt increases temporarily. It is the mind's attempt to restore the familiar order. Recognizing this prevents you from mistaking discomfort for wrongdoing. Saying no without guilt restores alignment because it brings your actions back into agreement with your inner truth. Each guilt-free no strengthens self-trust. You learn that you can choose yourself without the world collapsing. This learning is experiential. It happens through repetition. At first, you may still feel guilt even when you choose correctly. The key is not to eliminate guilt immediately, but to stop obeying it. You let it be present without letting it decide. Over time, guilt loses authority. It becomes background noise instead of a driver. This practice also clarifies responsibility. You are responsible for your choices, not for managing other people's emotional reactions to them. Guilt often arises when you take responsibility for feelings that are not yours. When you release this burden, relationships become more honest. Saying no without guilt also protects your energy. Many people are exhausted not because they do too much, but because they do too much against their will. Each forced yes creates inner resistance. Resistance drains energy. Honest no restores it. There is also grief here. You may grieve the version of yourself who always showed up, who was always available, who was praised for sacrifice. Letting go of that identity can feel like losing value. But what you are losing is not value. It is overextension. Guilt-free boundaries also reveal who respects you. Some people will adjust. They may not like the boundary, but they will accept it. Others will push harder. They may guilt, pressure, or withdraw. This information is painful, but useful. It shows where connection was based on access rather than respect. Understanding guilt as learned allows you to respond differently to it. Instead of arguing with it, you acknowledge it. This feeling makes sense given my conditioning. This acknowledgement softens the struggle. You are no longer fighting guilt or obeying it. You are observing it. This observation also creates choice. You can feel guilt and still act in alignment. This is courage. Not the absence of discomfort, but the willingness to stay true while discomfort passes. Saying no without guilt also refines communication. You stop over-explaining. You state your boundary simply. You allow silence to follow. This simplicity reinforces the boundary. It tells others that your no is not an invitation for negotiation. This does not mean becoming rigid. You still listen. You still consider, but the final decision comes from clarity, not from fear of guilt. This distinction changes everything. As guilt loosens its grip, you may notice more ease in your body, less tension, less bracing. You recover faster after interactions. You stop replaying conversations in your mind. This is alignment being felt, not conceptualized. Guilt-free no also deepens compassion. When you stop resenting your own yes, you stop resenting others. Your generosity becomes genuine again. You give when it is true. You stop when it is not. This creates balance. This practice also dismantles the belief that you must earn rest. Rest becomes allowed, not as a reward, but as a need. You stop apologizing for your limits. You honor them. Guilt often disguises itself as humility, but humility does not require self-erasure. True humility recognizes limits. It does not pretend to be endless. Saying no can be an act of humility. As alignment strengthens, you may notice fewer internal arguments. Decisions feel cleaner. You may still feel emotional reactions, but they pass. You trust yourself more. This trust also allows you to walk away from situations without closure. You no longer need everyone to understand or agree. You accept that alignment does not require consensus. The illusion of guilt fades when you see its pattern. It appears when you break a rule you did not consciously choose. When you question the rule, guilt loses meaning. This questioning is not rebellion, it is maturation. You move from obedience to discernment, from external rules to inner guidance. As you continue practicing guilt-free boundaries, life reorganizes. Your time aligns with your values. Your relationships become clearer. Your energy returns. And with this clarity, another attachment becomes visible. The need for closure, the need to explain endings, the need to finish every story neatly. Letting go of guilt prepares you for this next release. Because sometimes the most aligned choice is to walk away without resolution, trusting that not everything needs to be completed in words for it to be complete in truth. As guilt loosens and saying no becomes cleaner, another expectation quietly rises to the surface. The expectation that every ending must be explained, that every separation must be processed together. That peace only comes after everything is understood, agreed upon, and wrapped in the right words. This belief feels reasonable. It feels mature, but it often keeps you tied to what you already know you need to leave. There is a deep discomfort many people feel around unfinished endings, a sense that something is wrong if there is no final conversation, no shared understanding, no mutual acknowledgement. The mind wants symmetry, it wants balance, it wants the story to make sense, and so it reaches backward, even when the body has already moved on. Closure feels like relief because it promises certainty. It promises that once everything is said, the pain will stop. But closure is often another form of control, a way to manage uncertainty, a way to avoid sitting with the open-endedness of life. Walking away without closure is not avoidance when it comes from clarity. It is discernment. It is recognizing when further engagement will not bring truth, only repetition. It is seeing that some conversations are not unfinished because they were interrupted, but because they were never capable of delivering what you hoped for. Many people seek closure from those who cannot give it, people who lack awareness, people who avoid responsibility, people who rewrite reality to protect themselves. Expecting closure from them is not realistic. It keeps you negotiating with the past instead of living in the present. The Dharma of walking away without closure teaches that completion does not always require agreement. It does not always require explanation. It does not always require mutual understanding. Sometimes, completion happens the moment you stop participating. This is difficult because the mind equates completion with dialogue, with resolution, with emotional neatness. But life is not always neat. Some lessons end without ceremony. Some relationships dissolve without clarity. Some chapters close without summaries. Letting go completes itself when you stop feeding the pattern. You stop asking the same questions. You stop revisiting the same moments. You stop hoping for a different ending. This cessation is not passive. It is an active release of attention. There is also fear tied to walking away without closure. Fear that you will be misunderstood, that your silence will be misinterpreted, that your absence will be rewritten. These fears are real, but they are not reasons to stay entangled. They are reminders that you cannot control the narrative once you leave. Trying to secure closure often keeps you bound to someone else's capacity. You wait for them to understand, to apologize, to see you. This waiting delays your freedom. When you accept that understanding may never come, something relaxes. You stop postponing peace. Closure is also tied to validation. You may want the other person to acknowledge your pain, to confirm that your experience was real. This desire is human. But when validation does not come, continuing to seek it deepens the wound. Letting go means validating yourself. Walking away without closure does not mean pretending nothing happened. It means accepting that what happened does not need further processing with the person who caused it. You process internally. You integrate privately. This practice also respects timing. Sometimes the other person is not ready. Sometimes they never will be. Forcing closure does not accelerate healing. It often reopens wounds. The body often knows before the mind. You may feel a sense of relief at the thought of leaving, even without answers. That relief is information. It tells you that staying engaged is costing you something. Walking away without closure is especially important in situations where communication has become circular, where the same points are argued again and again, where truth is distorted, where gaslighting occurs. In these cases, seeking closure can become self-harm. The Dharma here is about recognizing when enough has been seen. You do not need to understand everything to let go. You need to trust what you already know. Letting go completes itself when you stop carrying questions that have no answers, when you stop waiting for permission to move on, when you accept that some endings are quiet. This does not make you cold, it makes you honest. You acknowledge the limits of dialogue. You stop asking the impossible. There is also grief in this practice. Grief for the ending you wanted. Grief for the conversation that never happened. Grief for the understanding that never came. Allowing this grief is part of completion. It honors what was lost without requiring resolution. Walking away without closure also strengthens self-respect. You stop begging for clarity. You stop chasing explanations. You stand in your experience without needing it to be mirrored. This practice changes how you relate to memory. Memories lose their charge when they are no longer revisited with questions. They become part of your history, not your present. There is also humility here. You accept that you do not need to know everything, that life does not owe you explanations, that peace can exist alongside unanswered questions. Walking away without closure does not mean cutting off emotions. You still feel, but you do not act on every feeling. You allow emotions to pass without turning them into action. This is not suppression, it is discernment. You choose what deserves your energy. As this becomes integrated, you may notice fewer urges to reopen old conversations, fewer fantasies about saying the perfect thing, fewer mental rehearsals. The mind begins to rest. Letting go completes itself when attention returns to the present, when you invest energy in what is alive now rather than what is already over. This also creates space for new experiences. When you stop carrying unfinished business, you become available, not because you are healed perfectly, but because you are no longer stuck. Walking away without closure is an act of trust. Trust that you can carry ambiguity. Trust that you do not need every answer to live well. This trust also reduces fear of endings. You realize that you can survive incomplete conclusions, that life continues, that peace is not fragile. As you practice this, you may notice a shift in how you approach choices. You stop over-negotiating. You stop delaying exits. You trust your timing. This does not mean leaving at the first discomfort. It means leaving when clarity is present, even if words are not. The Dharma here is simple but deep. Not everything needs to be finished in language. Some things finish when you stop holding them. And as you stop holding the past, another fear begins to dissolve. The fear of missing out. The fear that letting go means losing something essential. The next step is discovering that freedom does not come from holding more options, but from releasing the inner demands that keep you restless. As unfinished endings lose their grip and you stop waiting for every door to close neatly, another fear often steps forward. It is quieter than panic, but more persistent. A fear that whispers you might be leaving something important behind. A fear that says, If you let go, you might miss the moment that was meant for you. This is the fear of missing out. And it has less to do with life offering too little, and more to do with the mind demanding too much. Fear of missing out is not really about events, people, or opportunities. It is about distrust. Distrust in your timing, distrust in your choices, distrust in the idea that life can unfold well without constant monitoring. It keeps your attention split. Part of you is here, another part is scanning elsewhere, wondering if something better is happening without you. This fear becomes stronger in a world full of options, more paths, more possibilities, more visibility into other people's lives. The mind interprets this abundance as pressure. If there are so many choices, choosing one feels like losing all the others. Non-attachment begins to dissolve this pressure by changing how you relate to choice itself. Non-attachment does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop believing that happiness is hiding somewhere else. It means trusting that what is meant to be lived does not require frantic grasping. When this trust grows, the fear of missing out begins to soften, because you are no longer treating life like a competition you must keep up with. Fear of missing out thrives on comparison. You compare your current moment with imagined alternatives. Someone else's success, someone else's joy, someone else's path. These comparisons are incomplete. You see highlights without context, outcomes without cost. When you attach to these images, your present moment feels insufficient. Non-attachment breaks this spell by bringing attention back to what is actually happening. You stop living in potential futures and return to lived reality. This return is not resignation, it is relief. You realize you do not need to experience everything to live fully. Another root of fear of missing out is the belief that life has a limited number of chances, that if you miss one, something essential is gone forever. This belief creates urgency. Urgency creates anxiety. Anxiety clouds perception. You rush decisions, you overcommit, you say yes out of fear rather than truth. Non-attachment introduces a different understanding. It shows that life is not a single, narrow path. It unfolds through responsiveness, not accumulation. When you release the need to grab every opportunity, the opportunities that align naturally remain. Fear of missing out also keeps people from resting. Even rest feels suspicious. The mind says you should be doing something. Networking, learning, improving, catching up. Non-attachment allows rest to be complete. You rest without scanning for what you might be missing. This deepens recovery and clarity. There is also a deeper emotional layer here. Fear of missing out is often fear of being left behind, fear of being irrelevant, fear of being forgotten. These fears touch old wounds of exclusion. Non-attachment meets these wounds with presence instead of distraction. You feel them without letting them drive your choices. As non-attachment grows, you begin to see how many of your inner demands are unnecessary. You do not need to attend everything, respond to everything, know everything, be everywhere. Each demand fragments attention. Fewer demands create focus. Focus creates satisfaction. Freedom arises not from more options, but from fewer inner obligations. When you stop demanding that life provide constant stimulation or confirmation, contentment becomes possible. Contentment is not boredom. It is fullness without excess. Non-attachment also changes how you experience desire. Desire no longer feels like lack. It becomes curiosity. You explore what draws you without believing that fulfillment depends on it. You can want something without feeling incomplete without it. Fear of missing out often pushes people to stay in situations that no longer serve them. They worry that leaving closes doors. Non-attachment shows that staying out of fear also closes doors. Doors to rest, to clarity, to new forms of engagement. This practice also changes how you relate to time. You stop racing against imagined deadlines. You trust your rhythm. You allow seasons. Some periods are expansive, some are quiet. Both are part of a full life. Non-attachment does not remove choice. It removes desperation from choice. You choose because it is right, not because you are afraid of missing something else. This creates steadiness. You may notice that when fear of missing out fades, presence deepens. You enjoy what you are doing more, not because it is extraordinary, but because you are actually there. Attention is no longer divided. This also reduces regret. Regret often comes from comparing what is with what could have been. Non-attachment accepts that every choice includes loss, and that loss does not need to be mourned endlessly. It is part of living. Fear of missing out keeps you chasing peak experiences. Non-attachment reveals the value of ordinary moments. These moments were always available, but were overlooked because the mind was elsewhere. This practice also reduces envy. You stop measuring your life against others. You see that every path includes unseen struggles. Comparison loses its appeal. Non-attachment helps you commit. When you are not constantly scanning for better options, commitment becomes easier. You invest fully. This depth creates meaning that surface-level engagement cannot. Fear of missing out also fuels distraction. Constant checking, switching, consuming. Non-attachment brings simplicity. You do fewer things, but with more presence. This is deeply satisfying. There is also humility here. You accept that you cannot experience everything. That limitation is not a failure, it is human. And within limitation, depth becomes possible. As inner demands fall away, you may notice a quiet joy. Not excitement, but ease. You stop bargaining with the moment. You meet it as it is. Non-attachment also reduces anxiety about the future. You trust that what matters will find you when the conditions are right. You stop forcing. This does not mean passivity. You still act, you still explore, but you are not driven by fear. You are guided by alignment. Fear of missing out dissolves when you stop asking, "What if there's something better?" and start asking, "What is alive here?" That shift returns you to your life. As this freedom stabilizes, another situation arises. Sometimes choosing yourself means standing alone, not because you rejected others, but because your path no longer matches theirs. When no one understands your choice, solitude can feel heavy, and the next step is learning how solitude can become confirmation rather than isolation. As the fear of missing out loosens, a quieter challenge appears. You are no longer pulled in 100 directions. You are clearer, more selective, more honest, and yet something feels exposed. The path you are walking no longer matches the paths around you. Fewer people nod in agreement. Fewer people understand your choices. This is where many turn back. But this is also where choosing yourself becomes real. There is a particular ache that comes from being misunderstood, not argued with, not criticized openly, but quietly not seen. You speak from clarity and receive confusion. You act from truth and meet silence. This can feel like isolation, even when people are physically present. The mind asks an old question again. Am I wrong, or am I just alone? Most people avoid this moment. They adjust themselves slightly to regain resonance. They soften their truth. They re-enter familiar patterns. Not because they are weak, but because belonging is deeply wired into the nervous system. Being understood once meant safety. Being aligned meant survival. When understanding disappears, the body reacts as if something is wrong. But something different is happening now. You are not being rejected for who you are pretending to be. You are being misunderstood for who you actually are. That distinction matters more than it first appears. Choosing yourself when no one understands is not a heroic act. It is a quiet one. It does not feel triumphant. It often feels uncertain. There is no applause, no reassurance. Just a steady sense that turning back would cost you more than moving forward. Solitude begins here, not as absence, but as honesty. You are no longer surrounded by reflections that confirm your choices. You are left with yourself. This can feel unsettling, but it is also revealing. Without external reinforcement, you learn what you actually trust. Isolation says, "I am cut off." Solitude says, "I am standing with myself." The difference is subtle, but profound. Isolation feels like rejection. Solitude feels like alignment without witnesses. This kind of solitude often arises when your values shift, when your pace slows, when your priorities change. Others may not recognize you anymore, not because you disappeared, but because you are no longer operating from shared assumptions. You stop explaining because explanations no longer help. Silence grows. Distance widens. The mind may try to interpret this as failure. It may tell you that you are becoming distant, difficult, or disconnected. But solitude does not mean you lack connection. It means connection is no longer based on performance or agreement. One of the most challenging aspects of this phase is resisting the urge to self-doubt. When no one understands your choice, the mind looks for external validation to confirm it. Without that validation, old habits resurface. You may replay conversations. You may question your clarity. This is natural, but it is also where self-trust is tested. Self-trust does not come from certainty. It comes from consistency. You notice that when you act in alignment, even without understanding from others, your body feels calmer, your sleep improves, your thoughts slow. These signals matter more than approval. Solitude becomes confirmation when you notice that peace is present even in the absence of agreement. Not constant peace, not bliss, but a quiet steadiness, a sense that you are not at war with yourself. Many people confuse solitude with loneliness. Loneliness is the pain of wanting connection but feeling cut off. Solitude is the space where you are connected inwardly and not forcing outward resonance. Loneliness seeks escape. Solitude allows listening. In solitude, you begin to hear yourself more clearly. Not the anxious voice, but the grounded one. You notice subtle preferences, honest limits, natural rhythms. These were often drowned out by the noise of consensus. Choosing yourself in this way also reveals how often you relied on being understood to feel real. When understanding disappears, you realize how much of your identity was reflected rather than lived. Solitude strips that away gently, leaving what is actually yours. This does not mean you stop caring about others. It means you stop requiring them to mirror your truth back to you. You let your experience stand on its own. This is maturity, not withdrawal. Solitude also teaches patience. You stop rushing to be seen. You allow time to pass without trying to fill it with explanation. Over time, some people may come to understand, others may not. Both outcomes become acceptable. There is also grief here. Grief for shared language that no longer works, for relationships that once felt easy, for versions of yourself that fit more comfortably into certain spaces. Allowing this grief prevents bitterness. It keeps the heart open without pulling you back into compromise. Choosing yourself when misunderstood also reshapes humility. You stop assuming that your path must make sense to others. You accept that clarity does not require consensus. This humility prevents arrogance. You are not claiming superiority. You are simply honoring alignment. Solitude also refines discernment. You become more selective about where you share your inner world. Not everyone needs access. Not everyone will understand. You stop oversharing in hopes of being validated. You share when there is receptivity. This protects your energy. Being misunderstood repeatedly can be draining if you keep offering explanations. Solitude allows recovery. It lets you conserve emotional resources. Another shift happens here. You begin to see solitude not as a gap to be filled, but as a space to be lived in. You become comfortable being with yourself without distraction. This comfort is rare, and it changes how you approach relationships. When you are at ease in solitude, you stop clinging to connection out of fear. You choose connection out of resonance. This creates healthier relationships, less need, more mutual respect. Solitude also supports creativity. Without constant feedback, ideas develop more honestly. You are not shaping them for acceptance. You let them mature internally before sharing. There is also spiritual depth in solitude. Many insights arise only when the noise of agreement fades. You see patterns more clearly. You sense direction without needing confirmation. This is not isolation. It is attunement. Choosing yourself in this way requires courage, but not dramatic courage. It requires the courage to stay when nothing reassures you, to continue without applause, to trust your internal compass. This does not mean you reject community. It means you no longer use community to avoid yourself. You can be alone without feeling abandoned. You can be with others without losing yourself. Over time, solitude stops feeling heavy. It becomes neutral, then supportive, then even nourishing. You realize you are not alone in it. Many who choose alignment pass through this phase. They simply do not talk about it much. As solitude becomes confirmation rather than isolation, something else becomes clear. Choosing yourself is not about constant self-protection. It is about ending the habit of sacrificing yourself for harmony. That sacrifice, once praised, often hides a deeper violence against the self. And seeing that violence clearly opens the next door, where alignment requires honesty about the cost of self-sacrifice. As solitude becomes steady instead of frightening, a hard truth starts to surface. You begin to see that many of the moments you called love, loyalty, or peace were built on something quieter and more damaging. You did not just bend. You disappeared, not all at once, but slowly. And what once felt noble now reveals a deeper cost. Self-sacrifice is often praised. It is taught early and rewarded often. Be the one who gives. Be the one who understands. Be the one who keeps things together. On the surface, this looks like virtue, but beneath it, something else is happening. Each time you abandon your own truth to preserve harmony, a small act of violence occurs. Not dramatic, not visible, but real. Violence does not always leave bruises. Sometimes it leaves numbness. Sometimes it leaves confusion. Sometimes it leaves a quiet resentment you cannot explain. When you consistently choose peace over truth, your system learns that your needs are negotiable. Over time, this teaches the body that safety comes from self-erasure. The hidden violence of self-sacrifice lies in its invisibility. No one points to it, no one calls it harm. You may even be thanked for it, but your nervous system keeps the score. Each swallowed boundary creates tension. Each unspoken no creates pressure. Each forced yes leaves residue. Harmony achieved through self-abandonment is unstable. It requires constant maintenance. You must keep adjusting, keep anticipating, keep smoothing. This creates hypervigilance. You are always watching the room, tracking moods, preparing to give more. This is not peace. It is survival dressed as kindness. Many people who sacrifice themselves believe they are choosing love, but love that requires you to disappear is not love. It is attachment mixed with fear, fear of conflict, fear of rejection, fear of being seen as difficult. These fears push you to prioritize harmony over honesty. Buddhist wisdom does not celebrate self-sacrifice. It points toward non-harm, and non-harm includes yourself. When you consistently harm yourself to avoid discomfort in others, suffering multiplies. It does not disappear, it simply moves inward. One reason self-sacrifice feels right is because it reduces immediate tension. You say yes, and the conflict stops. You stay silent, and the moment passes. This short-term relief trains the nervous system to repeat the pattern, but the long-term effect is misalignment. Your inner and outer worlds drift apart. This drift creates exhaustion, not the kind that sleep fixes, the kind that comes from living divided. One part of you complies, another part resists. Over time, resistance turns into shutdown. You may feel flat, disconnected, unsure what you want. This is not because you lack desire. It is because desire has been ignored for too long. Self-sacrifice also distorts relationships. When you give beyond your truth, others relate to a version of you that is incomplete. They do not know where you end. You do not know where you end. Boundaries blur. Resentment builds quietly. Eventually, harmony breaks anyway, often explosively. There is also a moral confusion around self-sacrifice. Many believe that suffering for others makes them good, but goodness that costs you your dignity is not goodness. It is conditioning. You were taught that being easy makes you lovable, that being agreeable keeps you safe. That belief may have protected you once. It may now be harming you. The violence here is not intention. You did not mean to harm yourself. You were trying to survive. But survival patterns that continue past their usefulness become prisons. Seeing this is not self-blame. It is clarity. Self-sacrifice often hides behind spiritual language, acceptance, compassion, letting go. But true acceptance does not require silence in the face of harm. True compassion does not require endless giving. Letting go does not mean letting yourself be diminished. When you abandon yourself repeatedly, your body learns to expect betrayal from the inside. This creates anxiety, depression, chronic stress, not because life is unbearable, but because your inner system does not feel protected by you. Choosing yourself is the end of this violence, not through aggression, but through presence. You begin to notice when you are about to disappear. You feel the contraction. You pause. You choose truth over harmony. This choice can feel terrifying. Self-sacrifice has been your way of staying connected. Without it, you may fear loss, conflict, rejection. These fears are real, but staying in self-erasure costs more than leaving it. Ending self-sacrifice does not mean becoming selfish. It means becoming whole. When you stop abandoning yourself, your actions become cleaner. You give when you want to. You stop when you need to. This creates real harmony, not forced peace. There is also grief in recognizing how often you harmed yourself to keep things smooth. Grief for the times you stayed quiet, for the boundaries you never set, for the energy you lost. Allowing this grief is part of healing. It acknowledges the cost without freezing you in regret. As you stop self-sacrificing, others may react strongly. They were comfortable with your disappearance. Your presence may feel disruptive. This does not mean you are wrong. It means the system is changing. This shift also reveals how much of your identity was built around being needed. When you stop sacrificing, you may feel uncertain about your role. This uncertainty is temporary. It makes space for a more honest sense of self. Non-violence toward yourself requires courage. Not loud courage, but quiet consistency. Each time you choose not to abandon yourself, you rebuild trust internally. Your body learns that you are safe with you. This internal safety changes everything. Decisions become clearer. Boundaries become steadier. You no longer need to justify your existence through giving. You exist because you exist. Self-sacrifice also keeps people trapped in stories. Stories where you are the hero, or the victim, or the strong one. These stories give meaning to suffering. Letting go of self-sacrifice prepares you to let go of these narratives too. Because as long as you are sacrificing yourself, the story must continue. Someone must be saved. Someone must be endured. Someone must be blamed. When you stop sacrificing, the story loses fuel. This is where the next release begins. You start to see how identity itself has been maintained through narrative, through roles of hero, helper, or wounded one. And letting go of these stories becomes necessary for true freedom, because alignment does not come from being someone in a story. It comes from being present without needing a role at all. As the habit of self-sacrifice loosens, another structure quietly begins to wobble. You may not notice it at first, because it has lived with you for so long. It has given meaning to pain. It has explained struggle. It has helped you survive. And yet, it is also one of the deepest sources of suffering you still carry. This is the story you tell about who you are in the world. There is a subtle comfort in having a story, even a painful one. Stories organize experience. They give shape to chaos. They tell you why things happened and what role you played. Without noticing, many people organize their entire identity around one of two positions: the one who was wronged, or the one who endured and saved others, the victim or the hero. Both feel different, but they serve the same purpose. They keep the self intact through narrative. Narrative identity feels necessary because it gives continuity. It says, "This is me, this is what happened, this is why I am this way." The mind clings to this structure because without it, experience feels unanchored. Silence feels dangerous. If the story ends, who are you then? But stories do not just explain life. They replay it. Each time the narrative is repeated internally, the body relives the emotion. The nervous system does not distinguish between memory and present reality. Pain re-enters, tension tightens, suffering renews itself. The story where you are the victim often carries moral certainty. You were hurt. Something unfair happened. You did not deserve it. These things may be true, but when the identity is built around them, healing stalls. You may move forward in life while still referencing the same internal script. Each new situation gets filtered through the old lens. You remain vigilant, guarded, ready for the next injustice. The story where you are the hero feels more empowering, but it has its own cost. You were the strong one, the responsible one, the one who held everything together. This story gives meaning to endurance, but it also traps you in over-functioning. You feel valuable only when you are carrying something. Rest feels undeserved. Vulnerability feels unsafe. Both stories rely on memory to stay alive. They need repetition, they need explanation, they need retelling, and the mind is very skilled at keeping them going, especially in quiet moments. When the external noise fades, the internal narrator steps forward. Letting go of these stories does not mean denying what happened. It means recognizing that the story is not the event. It is a mental construction layered on top of experience, useful at times, harmful when mistaken for identity. Narrative identity keeps suffering alive because it keeps the past present. It insists that the meaning of what happened must be preserved. It tells you that letting go would erase truth, invalidate pain, or dishonor survival. But this is another misunderstanding. Truth does not require repetition. Survival does not require storytelling forever. Silence is threatening to narrative identity because silence does not reinforce roles. In silence, there is no hero, no victim, no explanation. There is just experience, sensation, breath, presence. And in that presence, suffering loses structure. This is why many people avoid silence. Not external silence, but inner silence. The kind where you stop narrating your life, stop interpreting every feeling, stop positioning yourself inside a story. When the narration stops, something unfamiliar appears. Space. At first, this space can feel empty, disorienting. Without the story, you may not know how to relate to yourself. This is normal. The mind has been leaning on narrative for stability. Removing it creates wobble. But this wobble is not collapse, it is recalibration. Letting go of the hero or victim story does not happen through force. You do not argue with the narrative, you simply stop feeding it. When the story arises, you notice it as a thought, not a truth. You return attention to the present moment, again and again. Over time, the story weakens, not because it is disproven, but because it is no longer necessary. You no longer need it to explain your worth or justify your boundaries. You no longer need it to make sense of every feeling. This shift also changes how you relate to others. When you drop the victim story, you stop unconsciously looking for confirmation that the world is against you. When you drop the hero story, you stop positioning yourself as the fixer or the strong one. Relationships become more equal, less charged. There is also grief here, grief for the identity you carried, for the meaning you extracted from pain, for the role that once helped you survive. Allowing this grief honors the past without chaining you to it. Narrative identity often disguises itself as self-understanding. You may think that repeating the story is insight, but insight that does not release suffering is incomplete. True understanding creates spaciousness. It reduces identification. It does not tighten it. Silence ends the story, not by erasing memory, but by ending obsession. Memory becomes memory, not identity. Experience becomes something that happened, not something you are. This silence is not blank, it is alive. It contains sensation, awareness, and choice. In silence, you respond to what is happening now instead of reacting from what happened then. Letting go of narrative also reduces blame. When there is no story to defend, you no longer need someone to be wrong. You no longer need yourself to be exceptional or wounded. You see causes and conditions instead of villains and heroes. This does not mean excusing harm. It means not building your selfhood around it. You can hold boundaries without carrying a narrative. You can remember without reliving. Narrative identity also limits possibility. When you believe, "This is who I am because this happened," growth becomes constrained. Silence reopens possibility. Without a script, you can respond freshly. There is humility in this release. You accept that life does not need to make sense in story form to be lived well. You accept that you are not the center of every unfolding. This humility brings relief. As the story loosens, mental noise decreases. You stop rehearsing explanations. You stop justifying your feelings. You stop arguing internally. Energy returns. This energy does not rush outward. It settles. You become more present, less defensive, less reactive. You listen more. You speak more simply. The end of narrative does not mean the end of meaning. It means meaning becomes immediate rather than conceptual. You find meaning in being present, not in interpreting yourself endlessly. When silence becomes familiar, suffering loses its stage. It has nothing to perform on. Pain may still arise, but it passes. It does not need a role. This is one of the deepest forms of freedom. You stop being someone in a story and start being awareness, experiencing life. This awareness is not dramatic. It is ordinary, and it is enough. As this silence stabilizes, something else becomes clear. When you are no longer narrating, you no longer need to persuade. You no longer need to be seen a certain way. External approval begins to lose relevance. And when approval no longer governs your choices, a new kind of peace appears, one that does not require explanation, defense, or validation. As the old story loses its voice, something feels almost unsettling at first. There is less to defend, less to explain, less to replay. And in that quiet, you start to notice a new kind of stability. It doesn't come from winning arguments or being understood. It comes from standing in awareness so fully that persuasion starts to feel unnecessary. This is where the hunger for approval begins to fade, not because you forced it to, but because it no longer fits the person you are becoming. There is a specific ache that approval once covered up, a small emptiness you tried to fill with being liked, being chosen, being seen as good, being seen as right. Even when you stopped chasing outcomes, even when you stopped performing spiritually, approval could still sneak in as the final question. Do they agree with me now? But when narrative identity quiets down, you begin to see how exhausting that question has been. You were living as if your piece needed a signature from someone else. Here is the emotional truth most people avoid. Seeking approval is not just wanting to be liked. It is wanting to feel safe. It is wanting relief from the fear of being alone in your choices. It is wanting someone to say, yes, you are allowed. And the reason this is so powerful is because the mind is trained to treat social acceptance as survival. Even if your life is stable, your nervous system may still act like rejection is danger. Inner alignment changes this from the inside out. When you are aligned, you don't need permission to be real. You don't need applause to trust your own experience. You don't need agreement to feel steady. You may still prefer harmony, but you stop bargaining for it. The need to persuade begins to fall away because you are no longer trying to secure your identity through other people's eyes. Persuasion is often a hidden form of fear. It is the attempt to control how you are seen so you don't feel the pain of misunderstanding. It is not always manipulative. Sometimes it looks like just explaining. Sometimes it looks like making sure they understand. But beneath it, the body is tense, the heart is bracing, the mind is scanning for signs of rejection. When you are rooted in awareness, you can feel this tension clearly, and you stop feeding it. This is where peace replaces persuasion. Peace does not argue for itself. It does not chase. It does not perform. It stands. And because it stands, it becomes visible. Not as an image, but as an energy. People can sense when someone is not seeking their approval. It changes the entire dynamic. Conversations become simpler because you are not trying to win a position. You are simply speaking from what is true. Inner alignment does not mean you never care what people think. It means what people think is no longer the foundation of your self-respect. You still listen. You still consider feedback. You still reflect. But you do not collapse when someone disagrees. Disagreement becomes part of life, not a threat to your worth. A strong sign you are becoming aligned is how quickly you recover from being misunderstood. In the past, misunderstanding might have haunted you for hours. You replayed the conversation. You wrote speeches in your head. You tried to fix the story. Now, you still feel the sting, but it passes faster. Not because you are cold, but because you are no longer hooked into proving yourself. Being rooted in awareness means you notice your own internal movements as they happen. You notice the urge to defend. You notice the impulse to explain. You notice the small panic that says, "Correct this now." And instead of obeying it, you pause. You let the urge rise and fall like a wave. This is the practice. You don't need to fight the urge. You just don't build a life around it. What makes approval irrelevant is not arrogance, it is wholeness. Arrogance says, "I don't need anyone." Wholeness says, "I can be with people without needing them to confirm me." That difference matters. One isolates, the other frees. When inner alignment grows, you stop trying to be seen as a certain type of person. You stop curating your tone so nobody feels uncomfortable. You stop shaping your truth into something easier to accept. You still speak with care, but you don't dilute yourself. This is where the nervous system begins to relax in a deeper way. Because the body senses when you are being real, and it also senses when you are performing. External approval becomes less relevant because you begin to value inner congruence more than social comfort. Congruence means your actions match your truth, not your mood, not your fear, not your image, but your truth. When you live this way, you start to feel clean inside, less residue, less regret, less inner noise. That clean feeling becomes more satisfying than praise. This also changes the kind of relationships you attract and maintain. When you are approval-seeking, you often bond through performance. You give what people want, you mirror, you accommodate. You become easy. When you are aligned, you bond through honesty. Some people won't like that. Some connections will fade. But the ones that remain feel more stable because they are not built on you disappearing. One painful part of this shift is realizing how many times you accepted less than respect because you wanted to be liked. You stayed in conversations that drained you. You tolerated subtle disrespect. You laughed at things that hurt. You nodded when you disagreed. Alignment exposes these moments not to shame you, but to free you. You begin to realize you don't need to earn basic dignity through being pleasant. Inner alignment also changes your relationship with conflict. Approval-seeking makes conflict feel like danger because disagreement threatens belonging. Alignment makes conflict feel like information. You can disagree without panicking. You can set boundaries without apologizing for existing. You can let tension be present without trying to fix it immediately. This is a major sign of emotional maturity. Another way approval loses power is that you stop living for later. You stop thinking, once they understand me, then I can relax. You stop postponing peace until someone validates your choice. You relax now because your nervous system learns a new rule. My truth is enough to stand on. This is not stubbornness, it is stability. Rooted awareness also brings a kind of quiet courage. Courage not to argue, courage not to convince, courage to let someone think what they think. This is difficult because the ego wants the last word. The ego wants to be seen correctly. But awareness has a different priority. Awareness wants peace. Not fake peace, but real peace, the kind that doesn't depend on controlling perception. You begin to understand that people's reactions are shaped by their conditioning, their wounds, their fears, their expectations. You cannot speak in a way that guarantees understanding. Even if your words are perfect, someone can still misinterpret you. When you accept this, you stop trying to engineer the outcome of being understood. You communicate, then you release. This is where inner alignment becomes a kind of freedom that feels almost unfair. The world may still be chaotic, but you are not. People may still judge, but you don't have to wrestle with them inside your head. You stop carrying imaginary courtrooms in your mind. You stop defending yourself in conversations that already ended. This is priceless. Approval becomes irrelevant, not because you stop loving others, but because you stop abandoning yourself for their comfort. You can love and still hold your line. You can care and still say no. You can be respectful and still be firm. You stop confusing peace with permission. There is also a subtle spiritual truth here. In Buddhist practice, the more you rest in awareness, the less you identify with the changing opinions of others. Praise and blame come and go. They are conditions. When you take them as identity, you suffer. When you see them as passing phenomena, you remain free. This doesn't make you insensitive. It makes you unhooked. And being unhooked allows you to act more ethically, because when you're not chasing approval, you stop doing good things for credit. You help without needing recognition. You apologize without needing to be seen as humble. You set boundaries without needing to be seen as strong. Action becomes clean when it is not bargaining for an identity. This is also where you begin to experience a different kind of respect from others. Not always. Some people will dislike your stability because it means they can't control you with guilt or praise. But many will feel safer around you because you are not needy for their validation. You are not trying to pull agreement from them. You are simply present. If you want to know whether you are rooted in awareness, look at how you handle being disliked. Not hated, just mildly disliked. Look at how you handle being left on red. Look at how you handle not being invited. In the old pattern, these things might have triggered a spiral. In the new pattern, you may still feel the sting, but you don't turn it into a story. You don't chase. You don't perform. You return to yourself. The final shift is this. You stop treating external approval as a mirror that tells you who you are. You become your own mirror through awareness. You see your intentions. You see your actions. You see where you were skillful and where you were not. You adjust without self-hatred. You learn without needing praise. This is inner authority, quiet, stable, and free. And once peace replaces persuasion, life starts to simplify in a surprising way. You stop wanting so much from every moment, every person, every outcome. The craving to be confirmed fades. The demand to be understood softens. You are not shrinking your life. You are reducing the inner pressure that made life feel heavy. From here, the path naturally turns toward an even simpler freedom, wanting less, not from life itself, but from your mind's endless demands. Because the more inner demands you drop, the more alignment becomes effortless, like breathing. When you stop persuading, something inside you stops straining. You no longer need the world to agree with you in order to breathe. And once that pressure drops, you start to notice something else that has been quietly exhausting you for years. Not people, not problems, but the endless wanting. The constant inner pull toward more. More clarity, more progress, more certainty, more recognition, more proof that life is going the right way. This is where the next kind of alignment begins, not through gaining, but through subtracting. There's a feeling that shows up when you finally get what you wanted, and it doesn't last. A promotion, a message, a compliment, a new plan, a new relationship, a new beginning. For a moment, the mind relaxes. Then it starts again. It looks for the next thing, not because you are ungrateful, but because craving doesn't want satisfaction. It wants motion. It wants the chase. It wants the promise that later will feel better than now. And as long as the mind keeps making that promise, the present moment keeps feeling like a waiting room. Wanting less from life doesn't mean wanting nothing. It means you stop demanding that life constantly reward you with a certain feeling. You stop expecting every day to prove your worth. You stop treating comfort as the only sign that you're on the right path. This is radical because it goes against how the mind has been trained. The mind was taught to measure life by outcomes and emotions. Buddhist wisdom points to a quieter measure: inner freedom. Craving is not always obvious. Sometimes it looks like ambition. Sometimes it looks like self-improvement. Sometimes it looks like, I just want to be the best version of myself. But if you look closely, craving has a flavor. It feels tight. It feels urgent. It feels like you can't fully settle until something changes. It turns your attention into a hungry hand, and that hungry hand touches everything you do. Even rest becomes a tool. Even meditation becomes a project. Even love becomes a demand. Reducing inner craving doesn't require you to move to a mountain. It requires you to notice how often your mind says, "This moment is not enough." That sentence is the root of so much suffering. Not because the moment is always perfect, but because the refusal to be here multiplies pain. You can have a hard day and still be present. You can feel grief and still be here. You can face uncertainty and still be here. But when you add the belief that you shouldn't be here, you create a second layer of suffering that is optional. When you want less, you stop stacking layers. You experience life more directly. You don't need to make the moment into a problem that must be solved before you're allowed to be okay. This is where reality begins to reorganize without effort, not because the world changes instantly, but because your relationship to it changes. You stop pulling life through the filter of constant demand, and suddenly life feels lighter without becoming smaller. Craving is exhausting because it creates a mental debt. It makes you feel like you're behind where you should be, behind what others are doing, behind your own expectations. Wanting less dissolves this debt. You stop living as if you owe the world a certain version of yourself. You stop treating time like an enemy. You stop racing toward a finish line that keeps moving. This shift doesn't make you passive. It makes you precise. When you want less, you choose better. You stop saying yes to things that only feed restlessness. You stop collecting experiences just to feel alive. You stop filling silence just to avoid feeling empty. You begin to sense what is truly nourishing versus what is just stimulating. A big part of wanting less is wanting less from other people. Not in a cold way, but in a freeing way. You stop demanding that others complete you, understand you perfectly, respond the right way, heal fast, stay forever, prove their love daily. Those demands create tension in relationships. They turn love into a contract. When you want less from people, you give relationships room to breathe. You stop gripping. You stop chasing. You stop testing. You become easier to be around because you are no longer trying to extract something from every interaction. This doesn't mean you accept disrespect. It means you stop trying to squeeze security out of what cannot provide it. If someone cannot show up, wanting more from them won't change that. It will only keep you in pain. Wanting less is not settling. It is seeing clearly and refusing to suffer unnecessarily. Wanting less also means wanting less certainty. This one is deep. The mind often says, "Once I know what will happen, then I can relax." But life doesn't work that way. Certainty is rare. Change is constant. When you demand certainty, you fight reality. When you loosen that demand, you regain your breath. You start living with flexibility instead of control. You make plans, but you don't worship them. You take steps, but you don't insist they must guarantee safety. In Buddhist terms, craving is tied to clinging. Clinging to pleasure, clinging to identity, clinging to outcomes, clinging to being right, clinging to being seen. When you reduce craving, clinging weakens. And when clinging weakens, fear weakens too. Because fear is often the shadow of attachment. You fear losing what you cling to. You fear not getting what you crave. You fear being without the thing you believe you need. Wanting less is like removing fuel from a fire. The fire doesn't have to be fought. It simply has less to burn. This is why simplicity feels like peace. Peace is not the absence of problems. It is the absence of unnecessary grasping. When you want less, your mind stops yanking you out of the present moment. It stops bargaining with life. It stops negotiating with every breath. The nervous system begins to settle because it is no longer being whipped forward by desire and backward by fear. Wanting less also cleans up decision-making. Many decisions feel heavy because they are loaded with craving. You want the perfect choice, the choice that guarantees happiness, the choice that avoids regret. But life doesn't offer that. There is no path without loss. When you want less, you stop demanding perfection from your choices. You choose based on values, timing, and reality. Then you let go. This is lighter. This is sane. This shift also changes how you handle discomfort. Craving often makes discomfort feel unacceptable. It says, "This shouldn't be happening." But the fight is gone. And when the fight is gone, you have more energy to respond wisely. A surprising thing happens when you reduce craving. You start noticing how much you already have, not as a forced gratitude exercise, but as a natural perception. The mind becomes less hungry, so it can finally taste what is present. A quiet morning, a stable breath, a simple meal, a conversation that is honest. These things were always there, but craving made them feel too small to matter. This is why reality reorganizes without effort. Your life might look the same from the outside. Same job, same house, same city, same routine. But internally, it feels like a different life, because you are no longer demanding it to entertain you or prove you. The ordinary becomes enough, not as a compromise, but as a discovery. Wanting less also protects you from the trap of endless upgrading. Upgrading your image, your lifestyle, your productivity, your body, your personality, your spirituality. Upgrading can be useful, but craving turns it into a prison. You keep improving yourself the way someone keeps polishing a mirror, hoping the reflection will finally feel like home. Wanting less allows you to stop polishing and start living. This is where simplicity becomes radical, because the world around you is built to intensify craving. Ads, social media, comparison culture, hustle culture. They all feed the belief that you are incomplete. Wanting less is a rebellion against that belief. It says, "I am not a problem to be solved." It says, "I can be here now." It says, "I do not need to chase constant stimulation to feel alive." Reducing craving also changes the way you use your time. You stop packing your days to feel important. You stop saying yes just to avoid missing out. You start leaving space, and space is where alignment grows. Space allows you to hear yourself. Space allows you to recover. Space allows you to notice what truly matters. This is also where your priorities begin to shift naturally. When craving drops, you stop doing things for status. You stop seeking relationships that only inflate the ego. You stop chasing experiences just to post them or talk about them. You begin to choose what is quiet, steady, and real. And because you choose better, life becomes more aligned without you forcing it. Wanting less doesn't make you dull, it makes you free. You still enjoy beauty, connection, growth, and pleasure. But you don't need them to be okay. You don't make them your identity. You don't cling to them, you enjoy them, and you let them pass. That ability to let things pass is the core of ease. There's also a deeper kindness that appears when you want less. You become less demanding toward others. You become less reactive. You stop needing people to behave a certain way for you to stay stable. This makes you safer to be around, not because you tolerate everything, but because your nervous system is not constantly negotiating for control. And the most surprising effect is this: when you want less, you often receive more. Not in a magical wish fulfillment way, but in a practical way. You see more, you appreciate more, you waste less energy, you stop sabotaging good moments by asking for better ones, you stop ruining today by chasing tomorrow. This is the kind of simplicity that doesn't shrink life. It clears life. It removes the inner clutter that made everything feel heavy. It brings you back to the only place you can actually live: this moment. Choosing yourself was never about becoming harder, colder, or more distant. It was about becoming honest. Honest with your limits. Honest with your truth. Honest with the quiet wisdom that has been guiding you long before you learned to doubt it. Letting go was not a loss. It was a return to stillness, to clarity, to a life that no longer needs to be forced. When you stop chasing approval, stop carrying familiar suffering, stop sacrificing yourself for harmony, and stop clinging to outcomes, something real happens. The inner noise fades. The constant negotiation ends, and alignment appears not as effort, but as ease. Life doesn't suddenly become perfect, but it becomes clear. You are no longer fighting it, you are walking with it. This is the quiet truth behind Buddhist wisdom. Freedom doesn't come from controlling life. It comes from releasing what was never yours to hold, from trusting change, from listening to your inner knowing once and acting without apology. When you choose yourself in this way, life doesn't resist you anymore. It aligns. If something in this spoke to you, don't rush past it. Leave a comment and write, "I choose alignment." Let it be a small but real commitment to yourself. And if you want more reflections like this, calm, grounded, and honest, subscribe to the channel and stay with us. We're not here to escape life. We're here to live it clearly.